Hello, everyone. Every night we walk through the dust of history, but tonight we stop at the edge of a river that swallowed an entire city before sunrise. One moment, streets and voices. The next, only black water moving where houses used to stand. You may not survive this night in the valley. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Above the valley, the South Fork Dam crouches in the mist, unseen but looming in your mind. You've heard stories, patched leaks, lowered crests, whispers of neglect. But tonight you try not to think about it. The hum of the river is hypnotic, but there's a strange edge to it, a low thrum that wasn't there before. Somewhere far downstream, a barge bell rings, muted and off-key. Historians are still debating whether early warnings ever truly reached the people here, or if the valley simply slept through them. Your hands rest on the damp railing, the wood swollen from days of rain. It's late spring, but the air presses heavy on your shoulders. You scan the clouds, low, swollen, the kind that promise more than just drizzle, the kind that empty themselves without mercy. The bridge sways ever so slightly under your weight, not from your steps, but from the restless current below. You think about how many others stood here before you, confident the river would always stay in its place. A lantern glows on the far bank, bobbing in the fog like a will-o'-the-wisp. Someone is heading home late from the mill, shoulders hunched, steps quick. It makes you think of the odd things people do to feel safe. Did you know Victorians drank something called lettuce opium to fall asleep? A milky extract from wild lettuce. Gentle, harmless, they said. You almost laugh at the thought of someone sipping it tonight, hoping it will keep the nightmares away. If only they knew what the river has planned. The sound of water shifts, a subtle change, like a whisper curling into a growl. You lean forward, peering into the dark, but see nothing unusual. Still, your skin prickles. Maybe it's just the chill. Or maybe you've been listening long enough to hear what others ignore. That the river speaks in warnings if you know its language. And tonight, it's speaking faster. There's a pulse to it, a heartbeat that doesn't belong to the earth. You think about the dam again, even though you tried not to. The earth walls, the spillway, the private club's fine boats tied in neat rows. Some say it's the largest man-made lake in the state. Others say it's the largest mistake. Historians are still debating whether the real danger lies in the dam's altered design or in the belief that something built by human hands can last forever. You're not sure which is worse, the structure's weakness or the town's faith in it. A gust of wind slips under your coat, carrying the damp scent of the hills. You close your eyes and listen. Somewhere upstream, rain is falling harder. You imagine it pooling against the dam, each drop adding weight. You imagine the pressure growing, the walls straining. But then the wind dies and the sound of the river returns to its steady, endless song. Almost enough to lull you. Almost. The kind of song that makes you forget what it's hiding. You take one last look downriver, the lights of the town glowing faintly in the mist. Somewhere behind those lights, people are settling in, closing shutters, stoking fires, believing the night will pass like any other. You stay a little longer on the bridge, caught between wanting to run and wanting to listen. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Post your location and local time so we know who's awake with us. Let's go up the road tonight, the catastrophe of forgotten historical remains. The whistle from the steel mill shrieks one last time for the day shift, a high metallic note that cuts through the mist and echoes off the hills. You step off the bridge and into the narrow streets where the sound lingers like steam from a kettle. Men in soot-streaked shirts spill out into the open, caps low, boots heavy, their faces carved with the kind of tiredness that's earned, not inherited. The air smells of coal dust and hot oil, and every doorway flickers with lamplight. This is how evenings in the valley have looked for decades, steady, unchanging. You pass a row of clapboard houses, their front steps sagging but swept clean. Women lean in door frames, rolling dough or shelling peas while watching the road. A boy in suspenders kicks a can down the dirt street, his laughter a quick spark in the damp air. A dog lopes past carrying something that looks suspiciously like half a sandwich from someone's supper. Even here, close to the river, there's a hum of routine. Chores to finish, lamps to trim, bread to slice, because no one believes the night will be anything but ordinary. Near the edge of the mill yard, you notice the cats. Dozens of them lounging along the fence rails, perched on barrels, slipping between stacks of timber. Factory cats, they're unofficially on the payroll, earning their keep chasing rats away from the grain stores. A foreman once joked that each cat saved the company more than any machine could. You watch one ginger tom leap from a crate to the roof of a coal shed, its shadow stretching long under the gaslight. It's oddly comforting, proof that someone's still keeping the balance here, even if it's just for scraps. A cart rattles by, the wheels spitting up mud, and the driver shouts to someone about the rain filling the river faster than the usual spring melt. You glance back toward the bridge, remembering the strange hum of the water beneath your boots. Some neighbors have been talking all week. Quiet, uneasy conversations about whether the dam upstream can handle the weather. Historians are still debating whether the flood horns were ever tested, or if they were just ornamental warnings, more for show than safety. No one here seems to know for sure, and no one pushes too hard for the answer. On the corner by the dry goods store, a group of men swap small-town gossip between puffs of pipe smoke. Someone mentions a telegraph from upriver, but it's waved off. Just another weather scare. You watch as the storekeeper flips the sign in the window to closed, leaving the street dimmer than before. The talk shifts to fishing, to card games, to who might win the 4th of July horse races. The dam and the rain are somewhere far behind their words, just like they're far behind their minds, or maybe buried under them. You cut through a side alley, the smell of fresh bread curling out from a basement bakery. A woman in an apron hauls a tray of rolls to the counter, steam haloing around her. You imagine her kneading dough this morning while rain hammered the windows, telling herself the storms come and go. But bread always rises. A small boy tugs her sleeve, asking if he can carry the last loaf home before the light's gone completely. She hands it over without looking at the sky. Back on the main street, lamps are lit in a checkerboard of windows. The glow looks warmer from here, but you know it's the same pale yellow it's always been. A cart piled with laundry trundles past, the driver humming some half-forgotten hymn. You slow your steps, listening to the town's rhythms, the clang of pots, the lowing of a cow in a shed, the snap of a rug being shaken from a porch. This is the heartbeat of the valley, strong, steady, and completely unaware that it's about to skip. One porch has gone silent. An old man sits alone, whittling a piece of wood into something that might be a bird or might just be a way to pass the time. His eyes track the water pooling in the street without ever looking at you. The shavings gather at his feet, curling in the damp air, and you think he's measuring the flood the same way he measures each cut. Slow, patient, careful not to slip. If he's worried, it doesn't show in his hands. Upstream, hidden in the folds of the hills, the South Fork Dam sits like a sleeping giant. You've seen it before on clear days. Its broad earthen wall stretching across the valley, holding back a glittering expanse of water that locals call the lake, but the club members call the reservoir. Tonight, though, it's invisible, shrouded in mist thick enough to erase the horizon. Somewhere in that fog, tons of water are pressing against clay and rock, patient and heavy. You can almost feel it from here, like the hum of a distant machine under the ground. It wasn't always like this. The dam was built decades ago as part of the canal system, back when people still thought canals would beat the railroads. When the canals failed, the dam was abandoned for years, left to sag and settle into the hillside. Then, in the 1870s, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club bought it, private investors with money to spend and a taste for quiet retreats. They patched the dam enough to refill the reservoir, but they also made changes that whispered trouble. The crest was lowered to make room for a carriage road. Relief pipes were removed. What had been a fortress was now quietly something less. The club loved its new lake. They stocked it with trophy fish, massive black bass and salmon trout brought in from faraway waters, because ordinary fish weren't impressive enough for a guest list that included Pittsburgh's wealthiest men. It was a kind of bragging right. Anyone could have a pond, but only they had one with fish big enough to make a photograph worth framing. You think about those fish tonight, swimming in water that's growing deeper by the hour, and you wonder if they sense the change pressing against their world. Maintenance was always a point of contention. Some say the club did what it could, patching leaks with clay, keeping the slopes trimmed, and clearing the spillway when they thought about it. Others say it was just enough work to keep up appearances. Historians are still debating whether the lowering of the crest alone doomed the dam, or whether it was the combination of that in the missing pipes, the clogged spillway, and years of small repairs that acted more like bandages than cures. No one can agree on whether the danger was inevitable or chosen. On certain days, you could stand near the base of the dam and hear water seeping through, trickling into the earth like a whisper escaping through closed lips. People said it was harmless, just groundwater finding its way home. But you've stood there and listened, and the sound didn't feel harmless. It felt like the kind of whisper that grows into a shout when no one's around to hear. The old engineers used to say that dams fail the way ropes snap, suddenly but only after fraying for a very long time. Tonight, the reservoir is swollen. Rainwater from 2 days of storms is pouring into it faster than the spillway can release. Somewhere up there, the fish screens meant to keep the prize base from washing out are catching more than fish. Branches, leaves, whole trees stripped bare by the wind. You imagine them piling into a tangled wall, and behind them, the water climbing higher, inch by inch, pressing against a barrier never meant to bear so much. The thought makes your stomach tighten, but you push it away. You remember a summer afternoon when you visited the club with a delivery cart. The members sat on the veranda in white suits, drinking lemonade and talking about the coming hunting season. Behind them, the lake glittered in the sun, a perfect mirror. They spoke of it like a possession, not a risk. You wonder now if any of them ever walked the length of the dam after a hard rain, or if they preferred to keep its quiet dangers out of sight and mind. Somewhere in the fog tonight, that same dam is holding back an entire valley's worth of water, tethered only by the work of men who've long since gone home. You can't see it, but you know it's there. And you know that things built to hold forever have a way of choosing their own end. The question is only whether anyone will believe it before they see it. You're leaning against the doorframe of your rented room when old Mr. Hanrahan from 2 houses down wanders over, pipe in hand, eyes fixed on the swollen river. His voice is slow, almost lazy, as he tells you about a flood he saw when he was a young man, far to the east. The Mill River flood, he calls it, back in '74. A dam broke up in Massachusetts, and the water came down like a giant rolling fist, flattening factories and homes in minutes. Folks didn't think it had happened there either, he says, puffing smoke into the damp air. You've heard the story before, but tonight it sticks. You picture the streets he described, thick with mud, the air sharp with the smell of wet timber and oil. You imagine the survivors, their clothes torn, standing in the ruins, wondering what invisible line they had crossed. Historians are still debating whether that disaster changed how towns prepared for floods, or whether it was just another entry in a long list of never again promises. If anything, it seems like the lesson faded long before the mud dried. Down the street, a group of teenagers lean against a fence, swapping stories of their own. Someone jokes that the dam upriver is so old it's probably held together with crocodile poop sunscreen. A jab at a rumor you once told them about how ancient Egyptians supposedly used that to protect their skin from the sun. The others laugh, nudging each other, and the moment feels lighter. But the joke sits like a pebble in your shoe, small, nagging, impossible to ignore when you start walking again. You wander toward the riverbank, the grass wet and slick under your boots. The current is faster than it was this morning, the surface churning in places where submerged rocks break the flow. It's the kind of river that can lull you into thinking it's harmless, until you remember it's just water, and water doesn't care about your illusions. Somewhere above you, that same water is gathering in a much bigger pool, behind an earthen wall built in another century. A wagon clatters past, the driver hunched in his seat, coat collar up against the drizzle. He gives you a nod but doesn't slow down. You catch a glimpse of the barrels in the back, flour, maybe sugar, things that can't get wet. There's a quiet urgency in the way he drives, as though he knows something but isn't ready to say it out loud. You watch the wagon disappear into the fog and feel a strange itch between your shoulders. Near the corner, Mrs. Talbot is sweeping her porch. She's been here longer than most, and she claims to have seen the river rise higher than any sane person would think possible. She tells you about a spring when the water came so close to her doorstep, she could see fish gliding past her front steps. That was the year we thought the dam might go, she says, tapping her broom against the rail. But it didn't, and so the story became just that, a story. You walk back through the narrow streets, the sound of the river following you like a shadow. The lamps glow in their steady rhythm, each one marking a home where people are eating, talking, falling asleep. The weight of the pass, the Mill River flood, Mrs. Talbot's fish, Mr. Hanrahan's smoke rings, hangs in the air, but no one treats it like a warning. And maybe that's the most dangerous part. Disasters like rivers have long memories. People don't. At your window, you look out one last time before drawing the curtain. The mist has thickened, swallowing the far bank completely. The river's hum is steady, but somewhere in it you think you hear a low note, deep and patient, like the breath before a shout. You tell yourself it's nothing. After all, nothing happened last time. Nothing happened the time before that. And until something does, nothing will. The road to the reservoir climbs in slow, lazy curves, its edges hemmed in by spruce and hemlock that drip steadily after days of rain. Your boots sink into the muddy carriage ruts as you follow the path upward, the valley air thinning just enough to make you notice each breath. Somewhere ahead, behind the fog, is the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, a place most people in town will never set foot in. The dam isn't just a wall here, it's a threshold, a gatekeeper between the muddy streets below and the manicured world above. The first thing you see when the trees break is the veranda. It wraps around the main lodge like a lazy smile, dotted with wicker chairs and white-suited men who speak in voices meant for drawing rooms, not mountainsides. Their shoes are polished, their collars stiff, and the most work their hands do is lifting a glass. A servant in a starched jacket circulates with a tray of lemonade, ice clinking against the sides. In the Gilded Age, ice was a luxury, cut in winter from rivers, stored in sawdust-packed houses, and shipped here so club members could sip cold drinks while the rest of the valley sweated through summer. Out on the lake, a row of canoes drifts near the shore, their varnished hulls catching what little light filters through the clouds. Beyond them, the water stretches into the mist, a mirror broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish beneath. This is no accident. Club members imported trophy fish to stock their lake, spending what would have been a laborer's yearly wages just to see a prize base on the end of a line. Here, the water is a playground, a status symbol, and a stage for stories to tell back in Pittsburgh parlors. It's easy to forget, looking at the scene, that the lake exists only because of the dam, a structure built for industry, not leisure. You notice the lowered crest, the carriage road running where once the wall stood higher. The road makes it easier for members to drive their carriages right to the lodge, but it also leaves less height to contain the water in a storm. Historians are still debating whether this choice, born from convenience, quietly invited disaster to the table. Some argue the club had the money to fix the dam properly, but chose comfort over caution. From where you stand, it's quiet. So quiet you can hear the faint plop of a fish breaking the surface somewhere offshore. A boy in short trousers and suspenders stands on the dock, rod in hand, while his father leans back in a wicker chair on the veranda, a cigar smoldering between his fingers. Neither of them glances toward the dam. It's just part of the scenery here, like the hills or the clouds, present but unconsidered. You wonder how many of them even know about the seepage marks, the patched leaks, the spillway that clogs after every heavy rain. A servant passes you carrying a silver ice bucket, condensation running down its sides. You think about the valley below, where ice melts in summer before it can reach anyone's table. Here, the cold is just another amenity. It's the kind of detail that says more than any speech. This place isn't built for survival, it's built for display. And displays have a way of ignoring the foundations that hold them up. The path along the water's edge is neat, almost too neat, the grass clipped short enough to show every pebble. You follow it until the land curves toward the dam itself. From this angle, you can see the bulk of it, a long slope of earth, its surface tracked by runoff from the recent rain. It doesn't look dangerous. It looks tired, like something that's been doing the same job for too long without a break. Back on the veranda, laughter rises, polite and measured, the sound of people who know they will be listened to. The rain has slowed to a mist, catching in their hair and beating on their cuffs. But no one moves inside. The lake lies still, the dam holds, and for now the club's world remains intact. It always has, until the moment it doesn't. The closer you get to the dam's face, the more it feels less like a landmark and more like a reluctant old machine, patched, adjusted, and repurposed over the years by hands that didn't always know what they were changing. When it was first built in the 1850s, the South Fork Dam had stout discharge pipes at its base, designed to drain the reservoir quickly if repairs were needed. But when the club took over, those pipes were removed. Some say it was to keep the waterline high for the fishing season. Others claim the pipes were too expensive to maintain. Either way, the reservoir lost its fastest escape route. Without those pipes, the only way to release water now is through the spillway at the top. Slower, clumsier, and prone to clogging. The club added its own touches, lowering the crest to make room for that carriage road and sealing leaks with whatever material was handy. Clay, gravel, even bits of timbers. The changes weren't dramatic in appearance, but in a dam, small changes can ripple like hairline cracks in glass. Historians are still debating whether removing the pipes alone was enough to doom it, or if the real danger lay in the sum of every shortcut taken. You stop near a storage shed at the dam side and notice an odd little instrument on a shelf by the door. A storm glass. It's a clear cylinder filled with liquid and crystals, a Victorian weather gadget that's supposed to forecast storms by changing shape. One of the caretakers swears by it, tapping it each morning to see if the crystals are angry. Today, the liquid is cloudy, the crystals clumping like sugar in bad tea. Whether or not it's accurate, you can't help thinking the dam itself is a kind of storm glass, holding signs of trouble if only someone will read them. Standing on the slope, you can see the patches more clearly, discolorations where water has seeped through over the years, leaving faint mineral stains like the veins in old marble. A recent repair is darker than the rest, the clay still damp from the rain. It looks solid enough, but you know earth is only as loyal as the pressure behind it. When that pressure grows, loyalty turns brittle. You run your boot over the grass, feeling the soft give beneath, and wonder how deep the dam's confidence runs. A grave digger in a wide-brimmed hat works at the far end, his spade biting into the earth with a steady rhythm. His boots are caked with dried mud, and the sleeves of his shirt are rolled past his elbows. He pauses only to wipe his forehead before turning the next shovelful, as if the work itself is the only thing keeping him upright. Near him, two boys kneel beside a mound, arranging stones in a careful pattern. One picks up a pebble, turns it over in his hand, then sets it at the center like the final piece of a puzzle. A light drizzle starts again, dotting the surface of the reservoir in perfect circles. The sound is gentle, almost soothing, but you can't stop thinking about how every drop is adding to the weight pressing against the wall. You picture the water as a guest who's been overstaying for days. Quiet, polite, but filling up every chair in the room until there's nowhere left to sit. Sooner or later, the host has to make a choice. Ask them to leave or watch the walls bow. You glance back toward the veranda where the club members sit under the awning, talking over cigars and brandy. From this distance, you can't tell if they're aware of the caretaker's work at the spillway or if they care. They've built a world where problems are always someone else's to solve. But here, at the dam's edge, you can't escape the feeling that the problems are patient and they know exactly how to wait. By the time you head back down the slope, the mist is thicker, softening the lines of the dam until it blends into the hills. From below, it looks as permanent as the mountains themselves. But you've been close enough now to see the patches, the missing pipes, the clogged escape route. And once you've seen those, you can't unsee them. The spillway sits off to one side of the dam like a neglected doorway, essential but not nearly as impressive as the broad wall it's meant to protect. You've seen it before on sunnier days. A channel carved into stone, angled to guide excess water away before it climbs too high. Tonight, in the drizzle, it looks more like a gutter clogged after autumn leaves. Branches, bark strips, and even whole saplings are jammed against the iron fish screens. their limbs twisting in the current like they're trying to escape. The water gurgles angrily through what gaps remain, but you can hear how much more it wants to rush. The fish screens were meant to be a favor to the club, keeping their prized bass and salmon trout from washing down into the valley. But favors can have sharp edges. The screens are fine enough to trap twigs and trash, and in heavy rain they become a comb, snagging everything the hills send downstream. The debris builds up quickly, silt packing in between sticks until the flow slows to a trickle. Historians are still debating whether it was the screens themselves or the silt that delivered the worst chokehold in the dam's final hours. Either way, both are here tonight, working together like conspirators. A caretaker in a broad oilskin hat stands ankle deep in the channel, pole in hand, prying at the mess. Every shove frees a branch, but two more slide in to take its place. You watch his shoulders rise and fall with the effort, the rain beating on his coat. Behind him, the waterline creeps up, almost imperceptible until you look twice. It's a race he can't win. Not tonight, not against the whole forest pouring into the reservoir from every hillside stream. You remember a peculiar thing you once read about Victorian umbrella etiquette. It was considered rude to open one fully on a crowded sidewalk in case you dripped on someone's hat or poked them with the tip. The rule seems ridiculous now, standing here as the rain thickens, but it's the kind of detail that matches this place. Everything is about appearances. The fish screens are the dam's umbrella, polished in intent, flawed in execution, and ultimately serving those who worry more about style than survival. The spillway stones are slick underfoot, their edges worn smooth by decades of rushing water. But tonight the flow is uneven, surging hard in one spot and pooling weakly in another. That's the silt's work, fine sediment carried in by runoff, settling into low pockets until the channel becomes a patchwork of shallow basins. You crouch to scoop some up, and it's like wet flour between your fingers. The hills have been sending this down for years, grain by grain, each storm layering another coat on the dam's escape hatch. From the reservoir's edge, the water presses against the debris pile with a steady rising push. Every so often, a larger branch bumps the mass, shaking loose a clump of leaves that spins away like a coin down a drain. But the blockage holds, stubborn as a locked door. You think about how easy it would be to ignore this scene from the comfort of the veranda. Just another worker wrestling with another bit of maintenance. But here, standing in the wet and hearing the strain in the current's voice, it's impossible not to feel the tension building. A gust of wind rattles through the treetops, shaking loose more debris that drifts toward the choke point. You glance at the caretaker, who's already turned his back to deal with another log coming in. It's a losing battle, but he doesn't stop. You wonder if he knows deep down that all this work is only delaying something much larger. Maybe that's the unspoken job, buying time, not salvation. By the time you step back from the spillway, the rain has eased again, but the waterline hasn't dropped. If anything, it's climbed another inch. The blockage holds, the silt settles, and the screens stand as they were designed, protecting the club's fish while holding the whole valley's fate in their iron teeth. You find the ledger in the caretaker's office, an old leather-bound book with pages as soft as cloth from years of damp hands turning them. Inside, the ink lists repairs and costs in tidy columns. Clay patch, 6 barrels, spillway cleared, 3 men, 4 hours, gatehouse roof, replaced shingles. At first glance, it looks like diligence, but read between the lines and you notice the spaces. Weeks without entries during storm seasons, repairs postponed until summer, small notes that say temporary fix in handwriting more hurried than the rest. Each line is a decision, and each decision leaves a trace. The entries stretch back years, and you can follow the pattern like a quiet drumbeat. A cracked plank left until it warped. A clogged spillway cleared only halfway. Workmen sent away before the job was finished because the weather turned. None of these choices would doom the dam on their own, but together they hum with the same rhythm as the river you stood over on the bridge. Steady, patient, waiting for the right moment. Historians are still debating whether engineers who raised concerns were taken seriously or whether their warnings were softened for the sake of keeping the club's peace. On the desk beside the ledger is a neat stack of letters tied with string. Some are complaints from townsfolk about seepage in the dam's base, about the fish screens clogging after storms, about hearing the earth wall groan in the night. Others are polite replies from the club, thanking the sender and assuring them everything is under control. You imagine the ink drying on those words, the sound of them landing like a warm blanket over a cold truth. In a place built on appearances, reassurance can be as dangerous as inaction. The club's members don't see ledgers or letters. They see the manicured lawns, the polished canoes, the calm surface of their lake on a still morning. On weekends, they hold penny-farthing races along the carriage road, men wobbling high on their bicycles, laughing as they circle the dam's crest. It's a strange sight, all that fragile balance teetering above the valley, both on the bikes and in the wall beneath them. You can't decide which image is more absurd, that of the giant wheels or that of the water they ride beside, contained by clay and hope. From the veranda, the dam is simply part of the view, a backdrop to card games and summer picnics. The idea that it could fail is as far-fetched to them as the thought of the hills flattening. But down in the valley, where the streets dip toward the river, people keep a different kind of mental ledger, the heavy rains, the odd tremors, the moments when the river swelled a little too much. Both ledgers exist, but only one gets written in ink. The other lives in memory and worry. You close the caretaker's book and set it back on the shelf, feeling the weight of every line in it. None of the entries shout catastrophe. They whisper it, quietly over years in the kind of voice you can ignore if you want to keep sleeping at night. It's the same voice you've been hearing since you arrived here, under the bridge, in the spillway, in the rain tapping on the lake's surface. Always there, always patient. Stepping back outside, the air is cooler and the mist clings low along the water. The sound from the spillway is muffled now, less urgent but not gone. You take the carriage road along the crest, your boots scuffing over the lowered edge. The view is both beautiful and unnerving, the reservoir stretching endless on one side, the drop to the valley on the other. One choice after another brought it to this shape. Choices made for convenience, for comfort, for spectacle. Each one small enough to seem harmless. Each one a line in a ledger no one ever meant to balance all at once. You pause halfway, looking out toward the hills where the storm clouds crouch. Somewhere beyond them, rain is still falling, drop by drop, feeding the lake behind you. You think about how many choices have been feeding it too, just as quietly. And you wonder which will overflow first, the water or the patience of the dam. The morning begins with a heaviness in the air, the kind that clings to your skin before the first drop falls. You tap the brass barometer on the shoemaker's wall, and the needle sinks a fraction lower, just enough to make you frown. Outside, the clouds are stacked like gray stone, their edges blurring into the hills. It's the sort of sky that doesn't just promise rain, it guarantees it, the way a loaded train guarantees noise. Somewhere above the Alleghenies, the storm is building, and all that's left is to wait for it to cross the tracks into the valley. By noon, the first drops fall fat and slow, dotting the dust on the street until the ground looks polka-dotted. Then the rhythm changes, faster, harder, the kind of rain that turns collars to rags and creeks into quicksilver threads. You watch it bead and roll down the window pane, tracing paths like maps of rivers you've never seen. The air smells green, like wet leaves and soil being turned under by invisible hands. You've lived through rain before, but this feels deliberate, as if the clouds have set their minds to wringing themselves dry no matter how long it takes. In the boarding house kitchen, someone mutters about storm years and bad harvests, blaming the weather on whatever suits their mood. You mention the barometer drop, and a woman drying dishes nods like it confirms her own private theory. She tells you her grandmother used to keep onions under the bed during nights like this, believing they'd absorb the miasma and keep sickness away. You imagine the smell sharp and earthy, and wonder if that would make the air feel cleaner or just heavier. Either way, it's one more thing the valley used to do without asking whether it worked. The rain doesn't let up by late afternoon. Instead, it shifts into sheets, blown sideways by a wind that sneaks in through every crack in the building. Across the street, you see a man in a long coat wrestling with an umbrella that's turned inside out, the wind flapping it like a wounded bird. He gives up and tucks it under his arm, hat brim dripping onto his boots. This isn't a passing storm. This is the kind that settles in and unpacks its bags. You step outside under the awning and watch the gutters overflow, spilling small waterfalls into the street. The cobblestones glisten, each one holding a pinprick reflection of the gas lamps, flickering in the wind. Somewhere beyond the bend, the river is rising, slowly for now, but with the steady confidence of something that's done it many times before. You think of the dam upstream, the water behind it growing heavier, pushing harder with every minute. Historians are still debating whether storms like this happen once in a century or once in 5. But in the moment, the numbers don't matter. A wagon sloshes past, the driver urging his horse to keep pace as the wheels sink into the mud. Behind him, 2 boys dart from one doorway to another, their coats too short to keep their knees dry. The sound of the rain swallows everything, hooves, voices, even the clanging of the mill. It's as if the valley has been tucked inside a drum and someone's taken up a steady, relentless beat. You count it without meaning to, the rhythm settling into your bones. By early evening, the hills are barely visible beyond the curtain of water. The lamps on Main Street glow like lanterns underwater, blurred at the edges, their light bending with every gust of wind. The smell of wet coal smoke drifts from the mill, mixing with the sharper scent of rain on hot metal. It's an oddly comforting blend, but it carries a weight tonight. You stand there listening to the rain's steady voice, and you can't shake the feeling that it's speaking to the dam, not to you. Down by the tracks, the rain has turned the cinders between the rails into a slick black paste. You step carefully, feeling it cling to the soles of your boots. The line that runs through the valley usually hums with movement. Coal trains, passenger cars, the occasional mail run. But this morning, the air is empty of the usual clatter. A single locomotive sits idling in the siding, steam curling into the wet sky, its engineer leaning out the cab window with a face that says he's waiting for news he won't like. By the time the church bells strike 10, the rain has found its own rhythm, steady, full, and loud enough to mask the small noises of the town. You stand at the edge of a side street where a shallow gully has become a restless stream, rushing brown water over cobblestones that weren't meant to carry it. The surface boils around a half-submerged crate, sending foam curling into doorways. This isn't the slow soak of spring showers. This is water with intent, moving where it's not supposed to go. The creeks that snake down from the hills are no longer creeks. They're miniature rivers now, each one swollen from the constant downpour, spilling over banks lined with laundry posts and chicken coops. You watch a coop break loose and drift downstream, 2 hens clinging to its roof as if it's the deck of a ship. They ride the current with surprising calm, their eyes blinking against the rain, their soft clucks swallowed by the rush. Somewhere beyond them, the current takes a sharper bend toward the main river. On your left, an old tin roof shed becomes a drum under the rain's hands. The sound is quick and even, like a metronome keeping time for an orchestra only the clouds can hear. In the Gilded Age, people use that sound as a kind of clock in bad weather, counting the beats between lightning and thunder, between chores, between visitors. Tonight, it feels more like a countdown, though you can't say to what. The shed's steady beat slips under your skin, syncing with the pulse in your ears. Along the road, people have begun to notice the change. A woman with her skirt bunched in one hand wades into her yard, trying to tug a floating barrel back toward the barn. A boy in rolled trousers kneels to push a wooden toy boat into the current, laughing when it shoots away faster than he can follow. The boat disappears under a small footbridge, and for a moment you imagine it tumbling all the way to the dam, a tiny messenger announcing how fast the water's coming. The mill whistle blows once, short, sharp, but no one seems to treat it as a warning. It's too easy to think of it as part of the day's noise, just like the creak of wagon wheels or the clang of shop shutters. Historians are still debating how much the people here actually noticed the early rise in the water. Some insist they saw it clearly and chose to wait it out. Others claim they never realized the difference until it was too late. In weather like this, details can slip away as easily as leaves in a gutter. You follow the main street to where the water meets the river, the rain blurring the horizon into a single sheet of gray. The surface is mottled, shifting in shades from black to muddy brown as debris drifts past. A scrap of cloth, a broken ladder, the lid of a wash tub. Each piece spins before the current carries it out of sight. It's hypnotic, watching the river take whatever the town offers without question or pause. Somewhere upstream, you know the same water is pressing against the dam's earthen wall, testing the seams in the slope. You picture it pooling higher, licking at the fish screens, searching for new ways through. The thought makes you shift your weight, as if the ground itself might soften under your feet. The rain is heavier now, and the sound of it swallows your breath for a moment. You turn toward home, but the streets are slower to cross now. The water pushes at your ankles, finding every seam in your boots. A man on the corner raises his hat in greeting, water dripping off its brim in steady threads. Neither of you says anything about the river. Neither of you has to. Tonight, the water speaks for itself. Down by the tracks, the rain has turned the cinders between the rails into a slick black paste. You step carefully, feeling it cling to the soles of your boots. The line that runs through the valley usually hums with movement. Coal trains, passenger cars, the occasional mail run. But this morning, the air is empty of the usual clatter. A single locomotive sits idling in the siding, steam curling into the wet sky. Its engineer leaning out the cab window with a face that says he's waiting for news he won't like. Beside the tracks, the drainage ditches are already choked. Water that should be slipping away in neat streams is pooling instead, swirling with leaves, sticks, and the occasional tin can washed down from somewhere uphill. You crouch to look closer and spot a half-submerged boot lodged in the grate. The water pushes against it like a patient hand, bending the leather until it slips free and vanishes into the current. It's a small moment, but it's proof. Clogged paths don't stay clogged forever. They break loose all at once. Farther along, you find the culvert under the embankment, the one that carries runoff from the western hill. The mouth is a tangled mess of branches and mud, the kind of blockage that turns trickles into sudden torrents when it gives way. A rail worker in a rain-slick cap is poking at it with a metal rod, muttering under his breath. You hear the frustration in his voice. This isn't the only culvert in trouble today. Historians are still debating whether these blockages made the flooding worse before the dam broke, or if they were just another symptom of the same storm's grip on the land. The locomotive lets out a long, low whistle, not as a signal, but as if to shake off the rain clinging to its frame. You remember reading that conductors in the Gilded Age carried pocket watches synced to railroad time, a standardized system meant to keep the nation's trains on schedule. Today, those watches might as well be ornamental. Whatever time the railroad runs on, the storm has its own, and it's not sharing the timetable. A flat car loaded with lumber sits on a siding farther down, the planks darkening as the rain soaks through. You imagine where they were headed, maybe for a bridge repair, maybe for some new construction in another valley, and wonder if they'll ever leave here at all. The tracks ahead curve into the fog, disappearing just before the river crossing. You know the bridge there, its wooden deck slick in the best weather, its beams creaking under a long train. You can't see it now, but you picture the water licking at its supports. A man in a heavy coat strides past, swinging a lantern though it's barely midday. He nods toward the engine and mutters something about a washout near Lily, a few miles upriver. That's why the train isn't moving. Too much risk in the dark, shifting ground. You watch him vanish into the mist, the lantern's glow shrinking until it's just another spark, swallowed by the rain. The ditches along the track keep overflowing, small waterfalls spilling over the embankment into the low ground below. The sound is strangely musical, water hitting water, with the occasional clank of debris striking metal. It would almost be pleasant if you didn't know where all that water was heading. Every drop racing down these slopes is another drop pressing against the dam, another fraction of weight in the reservoir's growing burden. By the time you turn back toward town, the rail yard feels quieter than ever, the engine's steady hiss the only heartbeat left. You pass the culvert again and see the blockage still in place, though the water has climbed higher behind it. It's just a matter of time. Everything today feels like a matter of time. Back in your room above the shoemakers, you watch the rain running in steady streams down the glass, turning the street below into a narrow ribbon of brown water. The shoemaker's wife knocks on your door and tells you she's moved their best leather stock onto high shelves, just in case. Her voice is light, but her eyes flick toward the window more than once. You decide it's time to gather a few things yourself, not in panic, just the way you might pack for a sudden trip. It's a habit in river towns. Prepare without admitting you're preparing. You pull a blanket from the bed, fold it tight, and set it by the door. Next comes the tin box of letters from home, tied in ribbon, and the small photograph of your parents standing stiff-backed in their Sunday clothes. These are the things that feel too heavy to lose, even if they weigh almost nothing. Beside them, you place a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. In the old days, people would hang bread from the rafters to keep it dry when floodwaters crept in. You've never tried it yourself, but the thought makes you glance up at the ceiling beams. In the hallway, a neighbor is doing the same, bundling clothes, setting aside jars of preserves, tying boots together by their laces. She catches your eye and smiles, but it's a quick, tight smile that doesn't reach her cheeks. Neither of you says why you're doing this. In towns like this, people have learned not to call a thing dangerous until it's already happening. Historians are still debating whether this is complacency, trust in the familiar, or practicality, knowing that most floods come and go without breaking the bones of the place. From the window, you watch a man across the street lifting a rocking chair onto his porch roof with the help of his teenage son. They laugh when it nearly tips, steadying it like a stubborn mule before easing it into place. The sight would be funny if it didn't mean the water was already licking at his front steps. You tuck another pair of socks into your bundle, the sound of their laughter lingering in your ears. The rain hasn't let up, but your ears have grown used to it, like the ticking of a clock you only notice when it stops. Somewhere below, the shoemaker is hammering soles, each strike a reminder that life goes on until it doesn't. You wonder how many others in the valley are packing tonight, quietly between supper and sleep. Maybe half the town, maybe none at all. You open the small trunk at the foot of your bed and add a sweater, a kerosene lamp, and your one good pair of gloves. Your hands know the motions without thinking. Roll, fold, tie, because you've done this before, years ago, when the river came up fast after a week of storms. That time it stopped a few inches from the threshold. You tell yourself it will be the same this time. You tell yourself this even as you add another loaf of bread. By lamplight, you check the bundle one last time. It's not much, but it's enough for a night somewhere uphill, should you need it. You set it by the door and sit on the edge of the bed, listening to the hiss of rain against the glass. The street lamp outside wavers in the wind, its glow stretching long over the water pooled in the gutter. It looks like a candle floating in a saucer. When you finally lie back, the blanket feels heavier than usual. The sound of the rain follows you into half sleep, steady and sure. You don't expect to use the bundle by the door, but then no one ever does until they have to. The telegraph office sits just off Main Street, its front windows beaded with rain and its wooden sign swinging lazily in the wind. You step inside and the air smells faintly of oil and warm metal, the scent of wires carrying news across miles of storm. In the corner, a green-shaded lamp casts a small pool of light over the operator's desk. It's the kind of shade favored in offices from Pittsburgh to New York. Soft on the eyes, they say, even after hours spent squinting at dots and dashes. The operator leans forward, headphones pressed to one ear, hand poised above the key. The machine clacks in a rhythm you can't quite follow, like an insect's legs tapping on glass. He scribbles shorthand onto a pad, his pencil smudging in the damp air. You glance at the lines he's writing. Water high. Watch dams. The letters tilt slightly, as if even the message itself is unsteady. He tears the sheet off, folds it once, and tucks it into an envelope without looking up. Outside, the rain lashes the windows harder. The office is warm, but the sound of the storm seeps in, filling the spaces between the clicks of the telegraph. You ask if the message is for the town council, and the operator nods, saying it's from upriver. His voice is even, but his eyes flick to the clock on the wall more than once. Time is part of his job. Time to send, time to receive, time to react. But the storm outside seems to keep its own schedule. You notice another message half finished on the desk, its paper curling at the corners. The first lines are clear, but the rest fades into smudges where a raindrop must have splashed. The words dam and pressure are legible, but nothing else. You wonder if it's an old message from this morning, or if it just arrived and lost its urgency under the blur. Historians are still debating whether the most urgent telegrams ever made it past this room, or if they drowned here in paper and static before the real flood arrived. The operator shifts in his chair, tapping out a reply with slow, deliberate strokes. You can hear the faint echo of another machine answering somewhere far away. It's like listening to ghosts have a conversation. Voices you can't see, speaking in a language you can't fully understand. The rain outside answers too, drumming on the roof, sinking for a moment with the telegraph's beat before slipping away into its own pattern. On a shelf by the wall sits a row of spare lamps, their green shades catching the light like still pools of water. You imagine them lit in every office along the valley's lines, each one a tiny island of calm in the storm. You think about how far the wires stretch, carrying warnings and gossip and everyday chatter through weather that doesn't care what's urgent. The operator finally looks up, his fingers resting on the key. "Line slow," he mutters half to himself, "wet somewhere along the ridge." You picture the wires sagging under the weight of the rain, the wooden poles swaying in the wind. Messages crawl instead of fly, and every mile of delay is another mile the water has to gather itself. When you step back into the street, the sound of the telegraph still rings in your ears, a nervous heartbeat under the storm's roar. You pull your coat tighter and glance toward the hills, where the dam sits unseen. The rain is heavier now, and you can't help wondering if the next message to travel those wires will be the one that comes too late. The first whistle cuts through the rain like a knife through wet cloth, a deep, echoing wail that rolls down the valley and bounces off the hills. You pause in the middle of the muddy street, tilting your head to catch the shape of it. Trains have their own dialect here, a mix of pitch, length, and pause that can mean anything from clear track ahead to danger on the line. Tonight's whistle sounds different, longer, heavier, almost mournful. Another blast follows, or this one with a slight tremor in its tone. You've heard old conductors say that every locomotive's whistle is as unique as a voice, especially the five-chime models. Some were given nicknames: the owl, the widow's cry, the preacher, depending on how their notes rose and fell. You try to match this one to a name, but it doesn't fit any you know. Maybe it's new, or maybe it's saying something no one's named yet. From the corner by the post office, you see a man in a raincoat stop and listen too. He holds his hat against the wind, his face turned toward the tracks. The whistle echoes again, and this time it's joined by a fainter one farther down the valley, like a call answered. You wonder if it's an improvised code, an attempt to pass a warning faster than the telegraph can. Historians are still debating whether residents here actually recognize these signals as danger, or if they mistook them for the usual chatter between trains. The younger engineer lifts a length of twisted metal high enough for everyone to see. Its curve is smooth in places, jagged in others, a shape made not by tools but by collision. He turns it slowly, letting the light from the windows catch on its edges, before setting it back down with a quiet clink. The gesture is deliberate, a reminder that whatever diagrams or theories may follow, the evidence here carries the scars of a single, undeniable night. Near the general store, a group of men under the awning start counting the blasts, debating whether they mean a stalled train, a flooded bridge, or something worse. One swears it's just a signal to slow down through the yard. Another shakes his head and says it's the pattern they used during the last big storm. The argument fizzles when the whistle sounds again, longer than before, hanging in the mist like a question that no one can answer. You think about how sound travels differently in weather like this. Slower, heavier, warped by the layers of wet air. A note that starts sharp might arrive dull. A warning that begins urgent might reach the next town like a lullaby. Maybe that's the real danger, not that the signal isn't sent, but that it arrives too soft to stir anyone to move. As you walk, the whistle fades, swallowed by the hiss of the rain and the low murmur of the river. The silence it leaves behind feels heavier than the sound itself, as if the valley has been holding its breath. You can't tell if the trains have stopped calling or if the storm has simply closed its fist around their voices. Either way, the language of steel and steam has done what it can. The rest is up to whoever was listening. You pull your collar up and glance once more toward the tracks, half expecting another call, but none comes. Just the rain, steady and unbroken, falling on a town that doesn't yet know which message it should have understood. The rain has driven most folks indoors, but in this town, porches are like open-air meeting halls. You pass one where 3 men sit on rocking chairs, boots propped on the railing, their hats tilted against the drizzle. A kerosene lamp glows between them, casting warm halos on faces lined with years of millwork. They're talking about the water, how high it's come, how fast it's moving, but their tones couldn't be more different. One swears it's nothing to worry about. Another says the dam's been groaning like a bad back all week. The third just sips his coffee and stares at the street. Across the way, two women lean against the porch post of a boarding house, arms folded, skirts brushing the damp floorboards. One insists they should gather their children and head uphill before nightfall. The other shakes her head, saying she's lived through worse storms and never seen that dam blink. You can tell neither is convincing the other. Their words hang in the mist like laundry on a windless day. There, but not moving anywhere. Historians are still debating whether local leaders ever truly urged evacuation before the breach, or if conversations like these were all the warning most people got. The smell of coffee drifts from an open kitchen window, rich and bitter, and you notice the percolator bubbling on the stove. A glass dome at the top puffing little bursts of steam like a miniature volcano. In some households, these glass volcanoes are more than appliances. They're the centerpiece of every decision made after supper. Here too, the talk circles back to whether it's worth leaving home for a storm that might pass by morning. The percolator gurgles and the woman tending it laughs softly, as if the sound settles the matter. Further down the street, a porch full of young men has turned the rain into entertainment. They wager on how fast a floating stick will race from one end of the gutter to the other. Someone shouts that the water's rising faster than it should, but the remark is swallowed by jokes about who owes whom a pint. Their laughter carries over the hiss of the rain, light and easy, like nothing in the world is waiting to break. You wonder if that ease is courage, denial, or just habit. One porch has gone silent. An old man sits alone, whittling a piece of wood into something that might be a bird or might just be a way to pass the time. His eyes track the water pooling in the street without ever looking at you. The shavings gather at his feet, curling in the damp air, and you think he's measuring the flood the same way he measures each cut. Slow, patient, careful not to slip. If he's worried, it doesn't show in his hands. Everywhere you walk, the porches hum with these small debates. Leave or stay, trust the dam or don't. Worry now or later. Some speak with conviction, others with the shrug of people who've seen enough trouble to know that not all of it arrives. You can't help thinking how little it would take to tip the balance. One official warning, one siren, one leader saying go now, with enough force to make it stick. But that hasn't happened yet. By the time you circle back toward the main street, the lamps are lit, glowing like low stars under the eaves. The rain patters against the roofs in a soft, steady rhythm. The porch councils keep talking, their voices rising and falling with the wind, each group certain they know how the night will end. You keep walking, wondering which of them will be right, and knowing that by morning it won't matter who guessed correctly, it'll matter who acted. The print shop smells of ink and hot metal, a scent that seeps into your clothes the moment you step inside. The clatter of the press fills the small room, a syncopated rhythm that's almost comforting in its steadiness. Sheets of fresh newsprint slide down the rollers, still damp, their edges curling as they stack. The front page carries the day's headlines, rail delays, a mayoral speech, and, tucked into the lower corner, a short notice about unusually high water in the South Fork Reservoir. No alarm, no bold type, just a paragraph between advertisements for corsets and patent medicines. Two men work at the typeset, fingers black with ink, speaking in low voices over the noise. One has a copper penny tucked into the corner of the form, the heavy iron frame that holds the type together. Printers call them lucky pennies, a superstition meant to keep the press running smoothly. The other man notices you looking and grins, saying the penny's been there for 10 years without a breakdown. You wonder if luck can hold against what's coming, or if it runs out like ink at the end of a long day. A boy in an apron darts between the press and the doorway, stacking fresh copies into his satchel. He tells you he's headed to the boarding houses first, then to the saloons. The rain is coming down harder now, but he doesn't seem to mind. He wraps the papers in twine and tucks them under his arm like warm bread. You ask if anyone's reading the water notice, and he shrugs, saying folks are more interested in the baseball scores. Historians are still debating whether the local paper downplayed the risk on purpose or if they simply didn't believe the danger was real. In the back room, the editor leans over a desk cluttered with proofs, red pencil in hand. He's marking out a line about overflow concerns, replacing it with seasonal rise, his script neat and confident. Maybe it's caution against panic. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's the belief that words can hold back a river as well as any wall of earth. You watch the change happen in seconds, the truth softened into something that won't quicken anyone's pulse. The press bell rings and another run begins. The heavy wheel turns, the ink plate glistens, and the type kisses the paper in perfect reverse. Each copy that comes off carries the same polite warning, no more urgent than a note about the price of flour. The boy returns for another bundle, slipping his cap low before heading out into the storm again. You hear the door slam behind him, the sound nearly lost in the roar of the machinery. Through the window, you see him splash down the street, calling headlines to anyone willing to stand in the rain and listen. Some take the paper, some wave him off, their hands busy with ropes and shutters. A woman tucks her copy under her shawl without even glancing at the front page. In weather like this, newsprint wilts fast. Words blur. Warnings vanish into pulp. Back inside, the pressmen keep their rhythm, the flywheel turning steady, the stacks growing on the table. The shop is its own little island, dry and lit and humming with work. You have the sudden thought that if the dam broke this very moment, the press would keep printing until the water reached its knees. It's not stubbornness. It's just the way things are here. Everyone keeps to their task until the task is impossible. As you leave, the editor nods without looking up, his pencil scratching another line into place. Outside, the rain swallows the sound of the press, leaving only the hiss of water on the street. You glance at the folded paper under your arm, the small note about high water barely visible between the smudges. Whatever else this storm brings, this will be the last edition anyone prints before the river decides the news for itself. Up at the dam, the rain feels sharper, colder, as if the wind has climbed the hill just to bite at your ears. The reservoir stretches behind the earthen wall like a dark sheet of glass, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple from unseen fish. From a distance, the dam still looks solid, but up close you see it sweating, thin veins of water trickling down the slope, darkening the clay in long streaks. The first time you spot one, you think it's nothing. The second time, you feel the skin at the back of your neck tighten. A man in a battered coat crouches near the crest, his hands pressed flat against the damp earth. He's an engineer, though not the sort in polished shoes and drawing room lectures. This one carries his tools in a canvas satchel and his luck in the form of a small brass spirit level he keeps in his breast pocket. He told you once it was a gift from his father to keep my lines true. Today he checks the slope with it out of habit, though the water doesn't care about perfect lines. You can see from the set of his jaw that the slope is telling him something he doesn't like. The rain has carved narrow rills into the topsoil, each one a tiny channel carrying water toward the wall's downstream face. It's nothing dramatic, just a pattern of cuts like scratches on an old door. But you know these small lines are where erosion starts. Engineers call it overtopping, when water begins to spill where it shouldn't, shaving away at the wall until the whole structure weakens. Historians are still debating whether the dam had already begun to fail inside. Piping, they call it, long before this moment, hidden under layers of clay and gravel. You walk along the crest, your boots squelching in the soft ground. The wind drives the rain sideways, stinging your cheeks and fogging your vision. In places, the path is slick enough that you have to brace yourself against the handrail. The reservoir to your left looks almost level with your feet, a mirror stretched too tight across the valley. You can't help thinking how thin the dam feels when you stand right on top of it, like a door between two rooms that couldn't be more different. Near the middle, a thin line of water is seeping over the crest. Not much, just enough to wet the toes of your boots if you stand too close. But that's the kind of leak that's never polite for long. You watch it spread into a small fan, trickling down the downstream slope and sinking into the clay. It's quiet now, just a wet whisper against the earth. But you've seen enough to know whispers have a way of growing teeth. A worker farther down is driving a spade into the slope, trying to divert a rivulet into the spillway channel. His movements are quick, almost jerky, like someone bailing water from a sinking boat while pretending it's just routine. The spade's blade glints dull silver in the gray light before disappearing into the mud again. He doesn't look up when you pass, his whole body bent to the work. The air smells of wet earth and something sharper, like metal warmed by friction. You realize it's coming from the friction between the water and the clay, a faint mineral tang that rides the wind. The sound of the rain on your coat almost drowns it out, but not quite. You imagine the dam itself breathing in short, shallow breaths, each one a little faster than the last. When you reach the far end of the crest, you look back and see the whole length of it in one sweep. The streaks of seepage stand out against the lighter soil, like veins in pale stone. The workers are scattered, each tending to a small problem in a different spot. None of those problems look big enough to bring the dam down on their own, but you know how hunger works. Small bites, taken quickly enough, can empty a plate before anyone notices. The pages turn slowly, each new line pulling the air tighter. Historians are still debating the accuracy of these first tallies, whether the damp ink and hurried script led to duplications or omissions, whether names were added from rumor or from fact. Standing here, though, you realize the list isn't about perfection. It's about making sure someone, somewhere, has said the names out loud, has written them where they can't be forgotten so easily. By mid-afternoon, the crest of the dam is a line of motion, men moving back and forth with shovels, poles, and whatever tools they've managed to haul up from the valley. Their boots sink with every step, pulling free with a wet pop that's quickly swallowed by the sound of rain on water. No one talks much. The storm is too loud and the work is too heavy. They jab at the spillway's choke point, heaving out clumps of branches and sodden leaves, only to watch new debris slide in from upstream like a conveyor belt built by the storm itself. Most of them wear oilskin coats so dark they shine in the dim light, each one carrying that unmistakable smell. Part wet rope, part lantern smoke, part sweat from the men underneath. The air up here is colder than in the valley, and steam curls faintly from their collars when they pause to breathe. You watch one man wipe his brow with the back of his wrist, leaving a streak of grit across his cheek. He doesn't notice. He's already lunging back toward the blockage, muttering at the stubborn mass like it's a living thing. The tools are mismatched, some proper shovels and pikes, others just planks with nails hammered through to snag the worst tangles. A few men work barehanded, hauling out branches that leave streaks of bark and mud on their arms. You can see the frustration in their faces each time the current sweeps in something bigger, a whole fence post, a log thick as a man's waist, that jams tighter against the fish screens. Every minute spent wrestling wood is another minute the water behind them rises. Historians are still debating whether more labor, more hands, could have kept the spillway clear long enough to save the wall. Standing here, you're not sure if even twice this crew could beat the river's determination. Down near the base, a foreman bellows orders over the storm, pointing men to the weakest slopes. A few break away from the spillway crew to shore up low spots with fresh clay, stomping it in with their boots. It's a desperate move, the kind of fix that's meant to hold for hours, not days. The clay clumps stick to their soles, making every step feel heavier. The slope looks stable for the moment, but the color of the wet clay tells you it's already taking in more water than it should. The rain doesn't relent. It falls in angled sheets, soaking gloves and sleeves until every movement makes a squelching sound. You pass a man leaning on his shovel, his chest heaving, rain running down the tip of his nose. He catches your eye, shakes his head once, then forces himself back into motion. No one here can afford to stop long. There's too much ground to cover, too many small problems that could turn into big ones if left alone. Some of the townsfolk have brought lanterns from their homes, placing them in a rough line along the shore. The glass fogs with steam from the rain and the flames inside flicker weakly, but the effect is strangely comforting. Small islands of light marking where people still stand, still watching. Every now and then, someone walks down the line, checking each lantern, shielding it from the wind just long enough to coax the wick into steadiness again. A sudden shout cuts across the work. Two men have slipped near the spillway, one dropping his shovel as he scrambles for footing. He's pulled back up, both of them soaked to the bone, but neither takes more than a moment to catch breath before returning to the blockage. The debris pile doesn't care who nearly drowned clearing it. It's already swallowing the next branch the current delivers. By the afternoon, the schoolhouse feels less like a courtroom and more like a workshop. The desks nearest the platform have been cleared to make room for objects hauled in from the flood's edge. Twisted iron rods, splintered beams, even a section of pipe as long as a man is tall. They rest on canvas sheets to keep the mud from staining the floorboards, though the smell of river silt still clings to them, damp and heavy. It starts as a low hum, almost too deep to notice under the constant hiss of rain. You're standing midway along the dam's crest when the sound presses into your ribs, a vibration rather than a noise. The men with shovels pause without meaning to, glancing toward the center of the wall, where the trickle has grown into a stream. The water there is different, thicker, darker, flecked with bits of clay that stain it the color of coffee. The slope below shivers as the water cuts into it, shaving away thin slices of earth with every pass. Engineers call this head cutting, when the point where water leaves its channel eats backward, faster and faster, like teeth chewing through bread. You can see it happening in real time now, the channel widening by inches, then feet, the stream sharpening its voice. Historians are still debating the exact minute the South Fork Dam began to fail, but standing here, you feel certain this is it, the moment when water stops asking and starts taking. The sound changes again, deeper still, so low you can feel it in your teeth. It's not just water rushing now, it's the valley's shape amplifying the force, funneling the flood into a narrower channel. You glance toward the hills and see mist torn into shreds by the sheer speed of the release. Trees along the bank bend as if bowing to an unseen monarch, roots clutching at soil that will be gone in moments. A gust of wind drives the rain sideways, and through the blur you spot a sheet of water peeling away from the slope in a smooth arc. It doesn't splash, it slides, taking a ribbon of grass and clay with it. The men nearest to it yell for more shovels, more hands, but their voices are swallowed by the roar building beneath them. Every load of clay they throw into the gap melts away as quickly as it lands. You move closer to the spillway, hoping for a better view, but the scene is worse there. The debris pile still holds tight against the fish screens, forcing more water to spill over the crest instead of through the intended channel. The blocked flow sends the reservoir looking for other exits, and it's finding them here, underfoot. The sound is hypnotic, rushing, pounding, deep enough to make you lean in, even though you know you shouldn't. It's the kind of sound that convinces you it's not dangerous just yet, right until it is. The engineer with the brass spirit level is kneeling near the breach, mud streaking his coat. He pulls the level from his pocket, stares at it for a long moment, then slips it back without checking. You understand why? This is beyond balance now. The dam's fate isn't something you can measure with a bubble in a vial. It's already tipping toward whatever comes next, and the only question is how fast. Another piece of the slope gives way, and the stream leaps forward, frothing white as it drops to the valley side. The noise deepens again, as if the wall is tuning itself to a darker key. You realize you're gripping the railing so hard your knuckles ache. It's not fear exactly, it's the pull of the sound, the way it threads through your bones until you can't tell if you're hearing it or feeling it. When you step back, the hum follows, vibrating faintly in your chest like the last note of a song. The men with shovels return to their work, but there's a new edge in their movements. Faster, sharper, more like people trying to hold a door shut against someone pounding from the other side. You know they can't do it forever. You're no longer sure they can do it for long at all. It doesn't happen with an explosion. There's no thunderclap, no shattering roar like the ones in stories. It begins with a shudder, a deep, rolling movement under your boots, as though the earth has sighed and decided it's done holding this weight. You feel it before you see it, a loosening, a sudden slack in the tension that's been stretching all day. Then in the center of the dam, the breach tears wide, a jagged mouth spilling black water into the air. The slope below shivers as the water cuts into it, shaving away thin slices of earth with every pass. Engineers call this head cutting, when the point where water leaves its channel eats backward, faster and faster, like teeth chewing through bread. You can see it happening in real time now, the channel widening by inches, then feet, the stream sharpening its voice. Historians are still debating the exact minute the South Fork Dam began to fail, but standing here, you feel certain this is it, the moment when water stops asking and starts taking. The water bursts free like something that's been dreaming of this moment. Logs, stumps, and whole trees spin in the churn, carried as lightly as driftwood in a stream. You spot a barn, still upright, swept forward as if it were no heavier than a matchbox. Later, you'll hear that a live cow was inside, riding the barn for miles downstream before it finally wedged against a hill. Right now, you can't look long enough to confirm. The breach is widening again, the dam's body collapsing into itself. Each fall of earth making the water surge higher. The locomotive lets out a long, low whistle, not as a signal, but as if to shake off the rain clinging to its frame. You remember reading that conductors in the Gilded Age carried pocket watches synced to railroad time, a standardized system meant to keep the nation's trains on schedule. Today, those watches might as well be ornamental. Whatever time the railroad runs on, the storm has its own, and it's not sharing the timetable. The sound changes again, deeper still, so low you can feel it in your teeth. It's not just water rushing now, it's the valley's shape amplifying the force, funneling the flood into a narrower channel. You glance toward the hills and see mist torn into shreds by the sheer speed of the release. Trees along the bank bend as if bowing to an unseen monarch, roots clutching at soil that will be gone in moments. For a heartbeat, you stand frozen, watching the impossible happen in real time. The dam that seemed eternal this morning is already half gone, its middle devoured by the river it tried to restrain. It reminds you of pulling a loose thread on a coat. Once it starts unraveling, you can't stop it, no matter how quickly you try to knot it back. Here, there's no knot to tie, only water to run from. The engineer with the brass spirit level appears at your side, his coat plastered to his frame, his eyes locked on the breach. He doesn't speak. There's nothing left to say. The wall has made its choice, and now the valley will have to live with it. You follow him off the crest, your boots sliding in the churned mud, every step carrying you farther from the roar, but never far enough. By the time you reach the road, the flood has taken the dam entirely, leaving only a jagged, foaming gap where the wall once stood. The reservoir is no longer a lake. It's a river with a new, violent purpose, thundering downhill toward a town that still has its lamps lit against the rain, unaware that the night has already changed. From the road above the dam, you catch the first full view of it. A black-green wall, alive and moving, filling the valley like a giant shoulder, sweeping everything ahead of it. It's not just water, it's a moving city of debris. Roofs tilt in the churn, fence rails snap like twigs, and whole trees spin in slow rolls before vanishing beneath the foam. The speed is unreal. It doesn't pour or glide. It lunges, covering ground in heartbeats that would take you minutes to walk. The wave is layered, like it's made of different rivers stacked together. The bottom is a thick, dark push of mud and timber, heavy enough to crush whatever it meets. Above it, the middle churns with lighter debris, shutters, crates, hay bales, spinning and colliding in chaotic bursts. And at the very top, the water froths white, lashing out in sprays as it slams against the banks. Somewhere in that mess, you swear you see the pale keys of a piano, its lid still closed, bobbing like a stubborn passenger. Later, people will swear it kept playing as it drifted, each note struck by the shifting debris inside. The bridge itself holds steady, its stonework dark and slick, but the heat rising from the debris makes the air shimmer. People have gathered on the bank, keeping their distance, their faces pale in the shifting light. Some shout to one another over the roar of the river and the crackle of the flames. Others just watch in silence, their eyes darting between the fire and the water, unsure which will reach them first. Historians are still debating how the blaze began, whether it was a fallen lamp, a knocked-over stove, or sparks from a collision hidden inside the pile. You watch a barn lift clean off its foundation, tilting onto one corner before the current swallows it whole. The air fills with splinters and the dull, bone-shaking thud of heavy beams colliding beneath the surface. The smell hits next. Mud, pine sap, wet earth torn from places it's belonged for decades. It's thick enough to taste, riding in with the mist that coats your face. The sound of water shifts, a subtle change, like a whisper curling into a growl. You lean forward, peering into the dark, but see nothing unusual. Still, your skin prickles. Maybe it's just the chill. Or maybe you've been listening long enough to hear what others ignore, that the river speaks in warnings if you know its language. And tonight, it's speaking faster. There's a pulse to it, a heartbeat that doesn't belong to the earth. You can track its movement by the flashes of light it throws. glass catching what little sun filters through the storm, tin roofs flipping in the air before vanishing into the depths. It's strange what your eyes choose to follow in chaos. A red door spinning like a coin, a child's wagon tumbling end over end, the glint of a weather vane as it turns once, twice, then is gone. For a moment you lose sight of the piano, and you imagine it lodged somewhere in the heart of the wave, keys striking at random with every collision. A strange thought slips in. Maybe it's the wave's heartbeat now, a pulse hidden in the noise, keeping time for a journey that won't end until the valley is emptied. When the wave rounds the next bend, the view narrows, the walls of the valley closing around it like a funnel. The sound deepens again, more focused, as if the water knows it has work to do and no time to waste. You realize that by the time you see it again, it will already be at the edge of town, and the town still has no idea. The first streets the flood reaches don't break apart all at once. They come undone, seam by seam, like a coat losing its stitches. Cobblestones lift in neat rows before flipping into the current, leaving behind muddy channels where the water claws deeper with every surge. Sidewalks tilt away from the storefronts they once guarded, their boards twisting into warped rafts before snapping free entirely. The current tears at the corners of buildings, prying them open to spill their contents into the street. You watch a grocer's shop split wide, sacks of flour bursting in pale clouds that vanish into the brown water. A crate of onions tumbles out, bobbing once before scattering in all directions like startled birds. Somewhere in the chaos, a loaf of bread floats past, spinning lazily in an eddy. You remember hearing how some people in other floods used bread as sponges, pressing it into oily puddles, then wringing it out in cleaner water. You can't imagine anyone doing that here. This water doesn't want to be cleaned. Along the main street, the river finds the gas lines buried beneath the cobbles. You don't see them at first, you hear them. A muffled pop, then another, as the pipes snap under the pressure. Bubbles boil up through the muddy surface, hissing before breaking with soft, wet plunks. The smell comes next, sharp and acrid, curling through the air in thin threads that ride above the damp scent of earth and timber. Historians are still debating how much these early breaks contributed to the fires that followed. But standing here, it's easy to see how quickly the flood could turn flame against what it hadn't already drowned. A small fire starts in a toppled lantern near the edge of the water, its light pale and fluttering under the rain. The current catches it, pulls it under, and for a moment it glows beneath the surface like a dying ember before vanishing entirely. It's a reminder that even fire has to respect the flood, at least for now. But the gas bubbling up tells you the respect won't last. From your vantage, you can trace the water's progress by the buildings it unmakes. A blacksmith's shop, its forge cold, but its smell of ash still clinging to the beams, folds in half and slides into the street. A dressmaker's window bursts outward, bolts of fabric unrolling into the current like flags surrendering to the wind. Each piece of the town is absorbed without pause, becoming another thread in the flood's tangled tapestry. Somewhere ahead, the water pushes through a narrow lane between two brick warehouses, slamming into the wall at the end before splitting into two smaller torrents. The force peels a strip of roofing from one warehouse, the tin curling back like a sardine can lid before the whole sheet sails into the current. It spins out of sight, flashing dully in what little light filters through the rain. The smell of gas is stronger now, clinging to the inside of your mouth when you breathe. You know it will drift through the rest of the town, invisible and dangerous, waiting for the right spark. For now, though, the water remains the only voice in the street, tearing, pulling, unmaking. Each block it claims feels final, as if the flood is sewing a new pattern over the old, one stitch at a time, until nothing is left of the original design. The factories along the riverbank have stood here for decades, their brick walls and iron frames built to withstand seasons of rain and years of soot. But none of that matters to the wall of water that hits them now. The first impact comes with a hollow boom as the current slams into the wheelhouse of the textile mill, snapping its axle like a matchstick. The water rushes in through broken windows, lifting looms and spindles from the floors and sending them tumbling like toys. In the foundry, the heavy molds that once shaped steel parts are wrenched from their cradles and spun into the current. They clank against each other like bells muffled by the water, their tones low and strange. The flood doesn't just take what's light, it takes whatever it can wrap itself around, no matter the weight. A boxcar from the rail siding, still half loaded with timber, slides forward as if nudged by an unseen hand, the tracks beneath it twisting and vanishing into the muddy surge. The rain, heavy as ever, carries with it the factory soot that has coated every surface in town for years. It mixes with the floodwater, turning the spray into something darker, flakes of black drifting through the air like ash. It's eerie, like a fire without flame. People who see it from a distance will later call it black snow, and they'll remember it as the moment the storm seemed to change seasons in an instant. The sight sticks in your throat more than the taste of the gas from the broken lines. Whole sections of the furniture workshop are torn away in one motion, the flood peeling walls from floors, floors from foundations. Tables, chairs, and uncut lumber whirl together in the current, the shapes changing so quickly it's hard to tell what was finished work and what was raw stock. You spot a half-built wardrobe spin in place before it collapses into boards, the pieces vanishing into the murk. At the paper mill, bales of pulp burst open, clouding the water with pale fibers that cling to everything they touch. The flood carries them along, wrapping them around fence posts, rafters, and even the occasional tree that's been uprooted and dragged into the streets. It's a strange kind of graffiti, the town's work staining its own ruins. Historians are still debating how much of the destruction came from the force of the river itself, and how much was caused by the debris it carried. Each factory, once struck, becoming a weapon against the next. Watching it now, you can see the truth. It's both. A single beam hurled at the right angle can punch through brick, and the current knows exactly how to swing it. The first streets the flood reaches don't break apart all at once. They come undone, seam by seam, like a coat losing its stitches. Cobblestones lift in neat rows before flipping into the current, leaving behind muddy channels where the water claws deeper with every surge. Sidewalks tilt away from the storefronts they once guarded, their boards twisting into warped rafts before snapping free entirely. By the time you step back from the river's edge, the factories are no longer factories. They're just open frames, skeletal outlines against a sky still churning with rain. The machines, the stock, the very bones of the buildings, all of it is moving now, claimed by the water and carried toward the heart of town. The current doesn't look back, and neither can you. The flood has a way of erasing voices, swallowing them under its own endless roar. But now in the narrow corridor of what used to be Main Street, a new sound cuts through, someone shouting a name. It's a deep, raw call, pulled from the chest like a rope hauled hand over hand. You can't make out the words at first, only the shape of them, carried over the water in desperate arcs. Then it comes clear. Sarah. The name stretches until it frays at the edges, only to be repeated again. The water answers with splinters and shadows. A shutter bobs into view, slaps against a floating crate, and vanishes. A barrel spins by with the broken handle of a broom sticking out of its rim. Every so often, something that looks like a person surfaces, but the current sweeps it away before you can be sure. The shouter keeps calling, moving along the edge of the flood, his boots sinking into the soft, greasy mud left in the water's wake. You remember a rumor you once heard in another river town, that in big floods, people would tie a spoon to their wrist with twine, the bowl resting against their palm. The idea was that if the worst happened, the spoon would help identify the body, each one unique to a household. You don't know if anyone here believes in that, or if it's just one of those strange customs people repeat to feel they prepared for something that can't be prepared for. Either way, the thought sticks with you now, sharp against the haze of rain. Another name joins the first. James. This one higher, thinner, almost breaking on the wind. It comes from a woman standing 2 buildings down, her dress plastered to her legs, hair whipping in the storm. She leans forward, one hand on the wall to steady herself, the other cupped around her mouth. Between calls, she scans the water with frantic precision, her eyes darting from one piece of debris to the next, as if each might suddenly turn into the person she's looking for. The flood keeps speaking in its own way. A door floats past, swinging open and shut with the current like it's still deciding whether to let someone in. A child's wooden horse, paint peeling in strips, rides the swell before tipping and disappearing. You can't decide which is worse, the sight of these things, or the knowledge that someone will recognize them when the water's gone. Historians are still debating how accurate the oral accounts from nights like this really are. People remember what they can, fill the rest with fragments, and pass it on until the edges blur. Standing here, though, you don't need a historian to tell you what's real. You can feel it in the way the names hang in the air after they're shouted, stubborn and heavy, refusing to be washed away as quickly as the buildings. The man calling for Sarah wades knee-deep into the edge of the current, scanning upstream. You start to step toward him, but a sudden surge forces him back, nearly knocking him over. He stumbles into the mud, catches himself, and keeps moving, his voice hoarse but unbroken. The woman's call for James overlaps with his now. Two names woven into the rain, into the current, into the night. When you finally pull your eyes from the water, you realize you've been holding your breath. The flood doesn't stop for grief. It carries it along, folding it into the weight of everything else it has taken. The names will fade in the air long before the water fades from the streets, but for now they stay. They stay because they have to. Downstream, the stone bridge looms out of the storm like a black archway, its thick pillars planted deep in the riverbed. Tonight, it isn't just a crossing, it's a trap. The flood's debris has slammed against its arches, piling higher with every log, beam, and rooftop the current drags along. The heap stretches nearly the whole width of the span, a chaotic island of wreckage bound together by the water's force. And then, impossibly, a flicker of light threads its way through the rain. At first you think it's a lantern caught in the pile, swaying as the debris shifts. But the light grows, orange and alive, licking at the edges of broken boards. A moment later, you catch the smell. Kerosene, sharp and oily, spilled from some upended cargo. The fire finds it quickly, racing along the slick surface in sudden bursts. Kerosene lamps were once called barn stars for the way they shone steady in dark rafters. Out here, in the heart of a storm, this barn star is climbing into something much worse. The wind fans the flames, sending them crawling up the sides of the pile. Wet timbers hiss and spit, but the fire holds on, feeding on whatever's driest in the heap. Pieces of painted siding flare like kindling, and scraps of cloth ignite in quick flashes before collapsing into ash. The sight is unreal. Rain hammering down from above, fire climbing up from below, the two locked in a fight neither seems willing to lose. The bridge itself holds steady, its stonework dark and slick, but the heat rising from the debris makes the air shimmer. People have gathered on the bank, keeping their distance, their faces pale in the shifting light. Some shout to one another over the roar of the river and the crackle of the flames. Others just watch in silence, their eyes darting between the fire and the water, unsure which will reach them first. Historians are still debating how the blaze began, whether it was a fallen lamp, a knocked-over stove, or sparks from a collision hidden inside the pile. A section of the debris shifts, the current prying it loose. For a moment, you think the fire will die as the burning timbers dip into the water. Instead, the flames leap to a new perch, climbing along a half-submerged roof that floats just enough to stay in the air. The light flares brighter, reflected in the wet stone of the bridge, painting it in strokes of red and gold. The smell thickens, burnt wood, oil, and something harsher you can't name. Smoke rises in dark columns, curling into the low clouds until it disappears. The rain turns it into a wet, choking haze that clings to your throat. You wipe at your face, but it's impossible to tell what's rain, what's sweat, and what's just the heat pressing against you. Somewhere beneath the bridge, the river hammers at the stone, its voice drowned now by the fire's crackle and the occasional groan of the debris shifting under its own weight. You realize the pile has become more than an obstacle. It's a dam within the flood, forcing the current to twist and surge in unpredictable ways. If it breaks loose, it will carry both fire and wreckage into whatever lies downstream. Standing there, you can't decide which is stranger, that the fire burns at all in this storm, or that it looks almost beautiful, a trembling crown atop a kingdom of chaos. Either way, you know the valley will remember this sight, the night the river carried both water and flame in the same breath. The fire on the debris pile throws an unsteady orange glow across the water, turning the rain into falling threads of copper. In that strange light, you see movement, small figures scrambling across the tops of roofs and timbers lodged in the wreck. At first you think they're trapped, but then you notice the ropes trailing behind them, the gestures to the banks. They're rescuers, somehow finding a way into this churning maze while most people can't even look at it without flinching. Two men stand knee-deep on the near shore, hauling on a line tied to a door raft. A woman clings to the makeshift platform, her hair plastered to her face, her dress snagged at the hem by a splintered board. The men pull hand over hand, their muscles tight, their boots digging into the mud. Each pull brings her closer to solid ground, and each time the current yanks back, the rope shudders like it might snap. She doesn't scream, just keeps her eyes on the bank, breathing in sharp bursts that match the rhythm of the firelight. On the far side of the bridge, a young rescuer crawls along a beam wedged against the stone arch, his body low to keep from being knocked off by the wind and spray. You notice his feet, not boots, but carpet slippers, the kind you'd wear in a parlor. Someone must have told him the fabric grips wet wood better than leather. It looks absurd until you see how steady his footing is, even as the beam trembles under him. In weather like this, absurd might be the only thing that works. He reaches a boy perched on a half-submerged wagon bed. The boy's eyes are wide but dry, his arms wrapped tight around a bundle that turns out to be a small dog. The rescuer loops the rope around both of them, signaling to the bank. A team of 3 hauls them in, the dog's ears flapping wildly as they skim over the current. The crowd on the bank exhales as one when the pair collapses onto the mud, boy and dog both shivering but alive. The old brick schoolhouse smells faintly of chalk and damp wood when you step inside, though now its blackboard bears no lessons, only a hastily chalked date and the word special inquiry. The long desks have been pushed into rows facing a raised platform where a table and 3 straight-back chairs serve as the bench. The benches still have their inkwells carved directly into the wood, small round hollows that once held glass pots for school children's pens. A few of them still glisten with trapped rainwater from the roof's steady drip. Historians are still debating how many lives were saved here and how many were lost within sight of the bridge. The records are incomplete, the numbers shifting in each account. But watching now, you realize the math doesn't matter to the people on the ropes or to those clinging to the wood. Every pull, every reach of a hand into the dark water is its own answer to the night's question. Will anyone make it out? On the upstream side, a rescuer shouts for another line, his voice half swallowed by the roar. A coil of rope flies through the air, landing just short, and he dives into the waist-deep current to grab it. He surfaces coughing, but with the rope in hand, and disappears again into the tangle of beams and broken furniture that hides whoever he's trying to reach. You stand on the edge, unable to look away. The firelight dances on the river's surface, making it impossible to tell where wood ends and water begins. It's a dangerous illusion, the kind that could pull anyone in if they lean too far. And yet, that's exactly what the rescuers do, over and over, until their arms and legs give out or the current takes the choice from them. Somewhere behind you, a voice whispers a prayer. You can't tell if it's for the people already safe on the bank or for those still out there in the ember-lit dark. Maybe both. From your spot near the bridge, the chaos has a strange rhythm. Rescue shouts, the hiss of rain, the deep crackle of the fire. But then another sound cuts in, high and clear. A railway torch swings in the dark, its red lens glowing like a single coal against the wet air. On the far bank, another torch answers, waving in slow, deliberate arcs. It's not random. The motion is steady, almost like handwriting drawn across the night. Behind you, the bell of St. Michael's begins to ring. Its tone is rough, almost flat, nothing like the polished chime of city churches. That's because the bell was tuned by a blacksmith in town, not a musician. Its pitch born of hammer strikes and fire, not tuning forks. The sound carries oddly in the rain, skipping over the water in broken echoes that still manage to reach the far side. The church's signal is simple. 3 rings, pause, 3 more. You can hear it even when the wind tries to shove it away. Closer to the bridge, a group of volunteers from the rail yard are working their own code. 2 long sweeps of a torch to signal clear, a frantic circle for help needed. You watch the patterns bounce from one side to the other, each answered with the same motion. It's like the valley has invented a new language on the spot, one of light and sound stitched together by urgency. Historians are still debating whether this improvised network was planned or if it grew naturally out of instinct and necessity. The signals aren't just for the rescuers. They're for anyone still in the water too. You see a man clinging to the roof of a collapsed shed turn his head toward the bell. The moment it rings again, he shifts his position, angling toward the volunteers who've started waving their torches in his direction. It's a small adjustment, but it gives them a better line to throw him a rope. Seconds later, he's being hauled toward the bank, coughing and shivering, but grinning weakly when his feet hit solid ground. Farther upstream, another bell joins the chorus. Higher, thinner, it's pitched just off enough to make you wince. Its echo overlaps with St. Michael's, creating a strange harmony that seems to confuse the ear. You wonder if the people in the water can tell the difference, or if they're just aiming for the nearest sound that promises safety. The rail torches keep swinging, a chain of small red eyes blinking through the night. The firelight from the bridge paints everything in flickers, so that the torch beams seem to move even when they're still. The effect is almost hypnotic. You find yourself following each arc like a pendulum, waiting for the next answering sweep from the other bank. It's as if the valley is holding a conversation without words, a back and forth that ignores the river's roar. Then for a few long seconds, the bells stop. The silence is heavier than the sound was, pressing against your ears until the next set of rings breaks through. The pause makes you realize how much the signals have become part of the night's heartbeat, how without them the dark would feel wider, emptier, more final. Somewhere behind the curtain of rain, another torch flares to life, joined by two more. The arcs grow slower now, but they keep going. It's not victory, not yet, but it's proof that the bridge, the bells and the rails are still speaking, and that, for tonight, the valley is still answering back. The current tears at the corners of buildings, prying them open to spill their contents into the street. You watch a grocer's shop split wide, sacks of flour bursting in pale clouds that vanish into the brown water. A crate of onions tumbles out, bobbing once before scattering in all directions like startled birds. Somewhere in the chaos, a loaf of bread floats past, spinning lazily in an eddy. You remember hearing how some people in other floods used bread as sponges, pressing it into oily puddles, then wringing it out in cleaner water. You can't imagine anyone doing that here. This water doesn't want to be cleaned. A few wear heavy oilskin coats, their surfaces glistening under the firelight. You remember reading that such coats were once waterproofed with boiled linseed oil. Stiff at first, but softening with wear, the smell clinging faintly even after years. The rain beads and runs off them in tiny rivulets, making the wearers look like dark statues in the shifting glow. One man adjusts his collar and goes back to scanning the water, his eyes never leaving the debris pile, as if he's willing it to break or hold. He can't decide which. Some of the townsfolk have brought lanterns from their homes, placing them in a rough line along the shore. The glass fogs with steam from the rain, and the flames inside flicker weakly, but the effect is strangely comforting. Small islands of light marking where people still stand, still watching. Every now and then, someone walks down the line, checking each lantern, shielding it from the wind just long enough to coax the wick into steadiness again. Across the bridge, shadows move in and out of the firelight. Rescuers check the ropes tied to the stone abutments, pulling them taut and letting them slacken, testing for strain. The occasional shout carries over, but it's less urgent now, more like a status report than a call for help. Whatever rescues were possible tonight have mostly been made. What's left is the waiting, for the fire to die, for the water to drop, for the sun to show what's really been lost. Historians are still debating whether the fire at the stone bridge truly burned until sunrise, or if that detail grew in the retelling. Standing here, though, you see how it could be true. The heat has dried a dome in the air above the debris, keeping the rain from touching its heart. Each time the wind shifts, the flames lick higher, as if tasting the wet night before retreating to their shelter. A boy in a patched coat curls up beside a crate, his head resting on his knees. An older woman, maybe his grandmother, pulls a wool blanket over him, tucking the edges under his legs. She keeps her own back straight, eyes on the river, as if sleep isn't something she can afford yet. The same posture repeats along the bank. People who could sit, who could lean back, but don't. They stay forward, as if they might need to act at any moment. Above it all, the bells have fallen silent. The absence is sharp, but in its place, you hear the subtler sounds. The hiss of steam when rain hits the fire, the creak of a rope against stone, the soft slap of a loose plank against the bridge pier. These are the sounds of the long watch, the hours when nothing changes quickly, but everything still matters. The sky to the east is still black, but there's a thickness to the darkness now, a sense that light is somewhere behind it, waiting its turn. No one says it out loud, but you can feel it in the way shoulders loosen just a little, in the way eyes drift away from the water to the horizon. The night hasn't ended, but the worst of it might be behind you, and that's enough to hold everyone here until the first gray light spills across the valley. Dawn doesn't break so much as seep in, a slow gray that works its way through the rain until you notice shapes where there were only shadows before. The fire at the stone bridge has shrunk to a smoldering skeleton, sending thin threads of smoke into a sky the color of wet slate. Around you, people shift on tired legs, rubbing their eyes with muddy hands, blinking at the sight of what's left. The water has dropped, but not enough to reveal the streets. What you can see are islands, patches of rooftops, the tips of church spires, the jagged outline of a clock tower with no clock. The current is slower now, thick with silt, carrying fewer beams and barrels, but still plenty of things you can't name at a glance. The debris pile at the bridge hasn't moved. It just sits there, blackened and steaming, like the burnt crust of some massive loaf. One man steps to the edge of the bank and plucks a handful of goose feathers from his coat pocket. He tosses them into the air, watching how they drift over the water. The habit looks strange here, almost whimsical, but you've heard of towns using feathers after storms to read the wind's shift. An old trick for deciding if more weather is coming or if the day might hold. The feathers dance in a lazy spiral before settling onto the surface, drifting eastward with the current. Historians are still debating whether the morning after the flood dawned clear or stayed wrapped in mist. In your eyes, it's both, clear enough to see a mile upriver, but still hazy, like the air can't quite make up its mind. The sun, if it's there, hides behind a gauze of cloud that lets through just enough light to make everything look drained, as if the night wrung all the color out of the town. The mud is everywhere. It coats the surviving fences, streaks the walls of buildings still standing, and spreads in uneven swaths across the bank where you stand. Every step you take makes a sound like a slow breath leaving the earth. Some of it glistens wet. Some of it has already crusted over, curling into patterns that look almost like scales. It smells heavy, earthy and metallic, with a sharpness that clings to your tongue. People begin to move along the bank, heading toward the shallower spots where they can wade into what used to be streets. They speak in low voices, as if the flood could still hear them and decide to come back. One woman points to a chimney poking out of the water and murmurs a name, her voice barely more than the sound of the current. A man beside her nods but doesn't reply. There's no need. Here, everyone knows what you're looking at. The east wind stirs, carrying a new smell. Damp brick, wet plaster, and the faint sweetness of something rotting. The man with the feathers tosses another handful, watching them drift toward the far bank. You don't know what answer he's looking for, but when they land, he nods once, as if the day has given him permission to continue. Up on the hill, the bells stay silent. The morning doesn't need them now. It's quieter than the night, but not peaceful. Just the quiet of people taking in what's changed and trying to decide where to start. By mid-morning, a long plank set across two barrels becomes the makeshift desk for the day's most sobering task. A clerk from the town hall sits with a half-empty inkwell and a ledger swollen from damp, its pages wavering like ripples under his hand. He pulls his sleeves up past the elbows, the cuffs already stained brown, and dips his pen to begin the first list. Names of those seen, those safe, those not yet found. People approach in small groups, their boots caked in mud, voices low. Some step forward with names ready, others hesitate, glancing at the water before speaking, as if the river might hear and deliver an answer. The clerk writes quickly but carefully, the letters curling just enough to show his training, though the ink bleeds into the wet paper like veins spreading under skin. A boy, no more than 12, steps up with a slip of paper folded in half. The clerk opens it to find 3 names written in a child's uneven hand. 2 people, and beneath them, Molly the cat. It's not the first animal to appear in the ledger today. You've seen dogs listed beside their owners, a parrot named and circled twice, even a workhorse noted in the margins. No one corrects these entries. In a morning like this, every absence counts. The pages turn slowly, each new line pulling the air tighter. Historians are still debating the accuracy of these first tallies, whether the damp ink and hurried script led to duplications or omissions, whether names were added from rumor or from fact. Standing here, though, you realize the list isn't about perfection. It's about making sure someone, somewhere, has said the names out loud, has written them where they can't be forgotten so easily. A woman with a scarf tied over her hair leans in to watch the clerk write. She corrects him gently when he starts to misspell her sister's name, the syllables soft but insistent. When he finishes, she taps the page once with her fingertip, as if sealing the record herself. Then she steps back into the crowd, her eyes fixed on the ledger for one more heartbeat before she turns away. Beside the desk, another man keeps a second list, scratched in pencil on a wide scrap of board. This one isn't for the missing, but for the safe, updated each time someone stumbles up from the flooded streets. It's rougher, messier, but the people waiting nearby seem to find it just as important. They crowd around whenever a new name appears, sometimes laughing in relief, sometimes covering their mouths as they read. The clerk pauses to wipe his pen on a scrap of cloth, the nib catching on the frayed edge. He glances toward the bridge, where the debris pile still smokes, and for a moment his eyes stay there. Then he dips the pen again, bends over the page, and writes another name in his careful, curling hand. The sound of the pen on the damp paper is barely audible over the murmur of the crowd, but it's steady. Name after name, line after line, the ledger grows heavier, not just with water, but with the weight of everything it now holds. In the foundry, the heavy molds that once shaped steel parts are wrenched from their cradles and spun into the current. They clank against each other like bells muffled by the water, their tones low and strange. The flood doesn't just take what's light, it takes whatever it can wrap itself around, no matter the weight. A boxcar from the rail siding, still half loaded with timber, slides forward as if nudged by an unseen hand, the tracks beneath it twisting and vanishing into the muddy surge. You step into the shadow of what used to be the grocer's shop. The front wall is gone, the counter tilted at an odd angle as if bowing to a customer who will never arrive. Shelves lean or sag, but here and there, glass jars remain upright, their contents still visible through the smears of silt. Pickles, preserves, and hard candy gleam faintly in the gray light. Survivors of both water and chaos. Wooden crates have split apart, spilling their goods into the muck, but the jars stand like tiny lighthouses in the ruin. Farther down, the cobbler's workshop is open to the air. The wooden racks that once held boots are empty, except for a single child's shoe balanced on its heel like a question mark. The stitching is still neat, the leather softened by soaking but intact. You can almost hear the scrape of the awl and the smell of fresh polish if you let your mind wander far enough away from the present. Historians are still debating whether the merchants here reopened within days or waited weeks, and you can see how either could be true. Some shops look like they could be swept out and stocked again by sunset. Others are nothing but shells, their goods swept downstream or rotting in corners where the water has receded. The difference seems to come down to luck, how high the flood reached, what angle the current took when it came for the door. In the apothecary, the counter has collapsed under the weight of sodden ledgers, but a row of medicine bottles sits untouched on a high shelf. The labels have blurred into unreadable smudges, but the liquid inside shifts and glints when the light catches it. It's almost beautiful, like stained glass washed loose from a church window. You wonder if the apothecary will try to save them, or if they'll be poured out into the mud without ceremony. The silence here is thick, different from the watchful quiet of the bridge. It's the stillness of places that haven't yet decided what they'll become. A shop can be mended, a shop can also vanish, its walls knocked down and replaced by something entirely new. For now, each doorway holds its breath, waiting to see which fate will step through. A man in a long coat stops at the threshold of the grocer's, peering in at the jars still standing. He doesn't touch them, just nods once before moving on, as if marking them in his mind for a day when hands will be steadier and pockets less empty. You watch him until he disappears around the corner, leaving only the sound of the slow, reluctant water behind. Near the center of the surviving district, the old stone well becomes the busiest place in town. Its rim is slick with rain and the touch of dozens of hands, the stone darkened from years of use and the past night's unrelenting weather. A rope dangles into the shadowed shaft, tied to a bucket that clinks faintly against the wall as it rises and falls. The line stretches far down the muddy lane, men and women standing shoulder to shoulder, each clutching whatever vessel they could salvage. Pots with bent handles, chipped enamel basins, even a child's pail painted with faded flowers. You step outside under the awning and watch the gutters overflow, spilling small waterfalls into the street. The cobblestones glisten, each one holding a pinprick reflection of the gas lamps, flickering in the wind. Somewhere beyond the bend, the river is rising, slowly for now, but with the steady confidence of something that's done it many times before. You think of the dam upstream, the water behind it growing heavier, pushing harder with every minute. Historians are still debating whether storms like this happen once in a century or once in 5, but in the moment, the numbers don't matter. An older man with a beard streaked white holds up a cloth bundle and unties it to reveal a handful of charred barley grains. He explains to the people nearest him that tossing the burnt grain into a well will sweeten the water, drawing away the swampy odor floods leave behind. It's an old trick, he says, older than any of them, and someone laughs softly, the sound more of habit than humor. Whether it works or not, no one argues. Rituals hold their own power in times like this. Historians are still debating if this particular well was ever fully safe again. Some records suggest repairs to the lining. Others claim it was sealed within the year. Standing here, you can see why they'd try to save it. The well has been the town's center for decades, its stone worn smooth by generations. To lose it would be like losing a clock tower or a church. It would shift the shape of the place entirely. A young girl in a patched shawl steps forward when it's her turn. She sets her tin cup on the rim and watches the bucket tip into it, her eyes wide and serious. When the cup is full, she thanks the man at the rope and carries it off with both hands, moving slowly so the water won't spill. Her mother follows close behind, holding a kettle against her hip. They vanish into the lanes beyond, steam from cooking fires curling faintly between the buildings. As the line moves, you notice the rhythm of it. Lower, lift, pour, step aside. It has the hypnotic quality of work that has been repeated for centuries, the kind of motion that could outlast storms, floods, even the slow turning of time itself. You wonder if, in years to come, someone will stand here on a bright day and run their hand over the well's rim without knowing that once the water it gave was more than a convenience, it was survival. By the second morning, the lane that runs south out of the valley has become a slow-moving ribbon of people. The road itself is rutted with mud, the kind that sucks at your boots and makes every step a negotiation. Carts creak under heaps of salvaged belongings, mattresses rolled tight and bound with rope, trunks with locks already rusting, bundles of clothes tied in patchwork sheets. Some travelers walk beside their loads, hands steadying wobbly wheels. Others ride, eyes fixed on the horizon as if afraid to look back. A faint chorus of honking drifts from somewhere ahead, and when you round a bend, you see them. A pair of geese tethered loosely to a cart axle, their long necks craning at every passerby. You've heard before that some towns use geese as alarm animals, their noise carrying far in the open air, warning of strangers or trouble. Whether these are meant for that purpose or simply too stubborn to leave behind, no one says. Still, their calls echo oddly against the wet hills, marking the procession like a living bell. Families cluster together, children tucked between adults, hands linked in a chain that won't be broken easily. A boy carries a wicker cage with a rabbit inside, its nose twitching at the scent of rain. Behind him, a man shoulders a long-handled spade, the metal dulled with silt. The way he holds it, you can tell it's not a weapon. It's a promise that somewhere ahead, he'll put it back to work turning earth instead of prying through rubble. Historians are still debating how many people left the valley in these first days compared to those who stayed. Some accounts say the road south was crowded for a week. Others insist the stream of refugees slowed after a single day, as people returned to guard what was left. Looking at the line now, you can imagine both being true, the determined marchers pushing on toward unfamiliar towns, the hesitant ones peeling away at crossroads, turning back toward what's broken, but still theirs. The further you walk, the thinner the procession becomes. Some step aside to rest under dripping trees, sharing bread or passing a flask. A woman stops to adjust the strap on her satchel, then turns to wave at a man still making his way through the muck. He waves back without breaking stride, his boots leaving deep, clean impressions in the softened road. The land begins to rise, giving you a last look back at the valley. The water glints faintly in the distance, curling around the black mark of the bridge. Smoke threads up from scattered chimneys, proof that not everyone has left. The sight is smaller than you expect, as if the flood has folded the valley inward, hiding its true size from anyone who walks away. The road ahead dips into another hollow, the sound of the geese fading into the damp air. You keep moving, one boot after another, the mud reluctant to let you go. Somewhere south, there will be dry ground, and maybe a place to sleep that doesn't sway with the river's breath. But for now, it's enough just to walk, the valley's edge slowly closing behind you. The old brick schoolhouse smells faintly of chalk and damp wood when you step inside, though now its blackboard bears no lessons, only a hastily chalked date and the word special inquiry. The long desks have been pushed into rows facing a raised platform where a table and 3 straight-back chairs serve as the bench. The benches still have their inkwells carved directly into the wood, small round hollows that once held glass pots for schoolchildren's pens. A few of them still glisten with trapped rainwater from the roof's steady drip. The townspeople file in slowly, filling the benches with a restless murmur. Some clutch hats in their hands, twisting the brims. Others lean forward, elbows on knees as if bracing for an exam. At the front, a clerk unrolls a sheaf of papers and places them neatly beside a stack of bound ledgers. Each page is weighed down at the corners by small stones, a detail that seems almost symbolic in a room where the air is thick with the idea of weight. Weight of loss, weight of proof. When the first witness is called, the room stills. A mill worker with a frayed collar steps forward, his boots squeaking against the warped floorboards. He tells of the dam's odd groaning the night before the breach, of water seeping through seams that hadn't leaked in years. His voice shakes at first, but steadies as he talks, gaining the kind of rhythm that comes when a person has been rehearsing the same words in their head all night. The panel asks questions. How high was the water? Was anyone from the owner's company present? And each answer seems to hang in the air longer than the last. Historians are still debating whether these hearings were truly about uncovering the causes or quietly steering blame away from certain hands. You can feel that tension in the way the panel members exchange glances before each new question, in the careful way they write notes without looking at the speaker. It's a conversation both public and private, a performance in a room where everyone knows the stakes. Between witnesses, the rain starts again, rattling against the tall windows. A boy sitting in the back, too young to be part of the proceedings, traces the grooves of an inkwell with his fingertip, glancing up only when the next name is called. This time it's a shopkeeper from the market quarter, her voice clear as she describes watching the water twist the bridge into something unrecognizable. Her testimony is brief, but the way she leaves the bench, chin up, eyes forward, draws a quiet murmur of approval from the crowd. The telegraph office sits just off Main Street, its front windows beaded with rain and its wooden sign swinging lazily in the wind. You step inside and the air smells faintly of oil and warm metal, the scent of wires carrying news across miles of storm. In the corner, a green-shaded lamp casts a small pool of light over the operator's desk. It's the kind of shade favored in offices from Pittsburgh to New York. Soft on the eyes, they say, even after hours spent squinting at dots and dashes. By the afternoon, the schoolhouse feels less like a courtroom and more like a workshop. The desks nearest the platform have been cleared to make room for objects hauled in from the flood's edge. Twisted iron rods, splintered beams, even a section of pipe as long as a man is tall. They rest on canvas sheets to keep the mud from staining the floorboards, though the smell of river silt still clings to them, damp and heavy. 2 engineers, coats buttoned to the throat despite the warm room, step forward to begin their explanation. One holds a pointer, the other a small slate covered in chalk diagrams of currents and pressure points. They take turns describing how water builds against a structure, how force multiplies when an obstruction narrows the flow. Their words are measured, their tone almost calm, except when one pauses to tap a bent rod with the tip of the pointer, letting the hollow ring fill the room like a note of warning. On a separate table, a shallow tin tray has been filled with water. The elder engineer sprinkles white chalk dust onto its surface and then tilts the tray slightly. The dust drifts into delicate swirls, tracing the path of the imagined current. He explains that this was a common trick to study flow patterns without risking lives or structures. Water remembers how to move, he says. You just have to make it show you. The onlookers lean forward, watching the ghost-like trails spin and merge, some nodding as if the lesson confirms what they already suspected. Historians are still debating whether the evidence presented here truly pointed to the disaster's cause or was curated to support a safer narrative. The rods, the beams, even the chalk demonstration, they may be accurate, but accuracy can be arranged to tell only part of the truth. Still, for the townspeople in the room, the sight of real, tangible pieces from the flood carries its own weight. These aren't rumors. They're things you can touch, things the river touched first. At the back of the room, a carpenter whispers to his neighbor, pointing at the grain in a shattered plank. He claims he built the original frame from which it came, and that it would have taken more than water alone to break it that way. The neighbor shrugs, unwilling to challenge the engineers, but not convinced either. The younger engineer lifts a length of twisted metal high enough for everyone to see. Its curve is smooth in places, jagged in others, a shape made not by tools but by collision. He turns it slowly, letting the light from the windows catch on its edges, before setting it back down with a quiet clink. The gesture is deliberate, a reminder that whatever diagrams or theories may follow, the evidence here carries the scars of a single, undeniable night. As the demonstration winds down, the engineers gather their notes, but the artifacts remain on display. People linger after the panel dismisses them, stepping up to run fingers over splintered wood or trace the warped lines of the iron. Some ask quiet questions, others just look, as if staring long enough might reveal the moment everything gave way. By late afternoon, the benches in the schoolhouse are slick with the damp coats of people who have been sitting since morning. The air feels thicker now, heavy with the mingled scents of wet wool, paper, and the faint tang of mud drying on boots. The clerk gathers the ledgers into a neat stack, aligning their edges with the care of someone who knows what comes next will matter. The chair of the panel, a man with shoulders so squared they look carved, clears his throat and announces that the inquiry will not deliver its conclusion today. Instead, the proceedings will pause for further examination of witness statements and structural evidence. The words are measured, almost bland, but their effect ripples through the room. You can hear the shift in the benches as people lean toward one another, whispering quick, tight sentences. Historians are still debating whether this delay was the product of political pressure, perhaps from those who would bear the cost of blame, or the honest hesitation of officials faced with conflicting testimony. Either way, the choice leaves the story unfinished for now, hanging like a bridge mid-span over water still moving beneath it. The signals aren't just for the rescuers. They're for anyone still in the water too. You see a man clinging to the roof of a collapsed shed turn his head toward the bell. The moment it rings again, he shifts his position, angling toward the volunteers who've started waving their torches in his direction. It's a small adjustment, but it gives them a better line to throw him a rope. Seconds later, he's being hauled toward the bank, coughing and shivering, but grinning weakly when his feet hit solid ground. One by one, the panel members rise from their chairs and step down from the platform. They leave through a narrow side door, their boots tapping on the warped boards. The rest of the room stays seated for a moment longer, as if unsure whether they're free to go. Then the movement begins. Coats pulled on, hats set low, quiet footsteps toward the doors. But then a bit of debris, an unrecognizable scrap of wood, floats past, spinning slowly in the same current that carried so much more not long ago. The hum under the surface seems to deepen for a heartbeat, then settles back into its steady voice. You take one last look before turning away, the sound following you like a half-remembered phrase. As you step away from the schoolhouse, you glance back at its tall windows. Behind the glass, the artifacts from the engineer's table still sit on their canvas, shadows stretching across them in the fading light. They'll be there tomorrow, waiting for the story to be tied to them, or for the story to slide away, leaving only the objects behind. When you finally walk the road back toward the bridge, the air feels different, emptier, but not lighter. The mud on the banks has darkened to a cracked skin, curling upward at the edges, and the smell of smoke has thinned to a memory you have to search for. The water has pulled away from the stone arches, revealing the lower courses blackened and scoured smooth in places where the current tore past. The debris pile that once blocked the span is gone, dismantled plank by plank, beam by beam. Only a few stubborn pieces cling to the upriver piers, the rest carted away to dry ground where they can be sorted, burned, or simply left to rot. You stand where the bank slopes toward the arch and trace the line of stone upward, wondering how many times these blocks have faced the river's temper. The edges are worn, not just by this flood, but by decades of smaller swells. Each one another mark in the long ledger of the bridge's life. A small group gathers at the center of the span. They speak quietly, passing a handful of coins from palm to palm. One by one, they step to the parapet and toss the coins into the slow brown water below. You've heard of this before. In some towns, it's a way to bless a repaired bridge, or to buy the river's patience for a while longer. The coins flash briefly before vanishing into the ripples, tiny bursts of light swallowed by the current. Historians are still debating whether this bridge was ultimately repaired atop its original foundations or rebuilt entirely in the months that followed. Standing here, you can imagine both stories, one of resilience, where old stone holds firm with a little help, and one of renewal, where fresh-cut blocks take the place of those too tired to bear another flood. Either way, the bridge still stands, and that alone feels like an answer after so many days without them. On the downstream side, a mason chips at a seam between two stones, clearing silt from the joints. His chisel makes a bright, ringing sound that carries over the water. He works steadily, without glancing up at the watchers, each tap of the tool a quiet defiance against the river's claim. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint tang of iron from the tools. You rest your hands on the cool stone of the parapet and look out over the valley. The river moves slower now, but its surface still hides its depths. You know it will never tell all it took or all it left behind. The hill above the town has always been a quiet place, the kind where the wind seems to pause before crossing the valley. Now, in the days after the flood, it has taken on a weight you can feel in your chest before you even reach the gate. The ground here is damp but firm, the grass pressed flat in wide paths where feet have passed again and again. Beyond the low stone wall, new mounds rise in uneven rows, the fresh earth still darker than the rest of the slope. People move among them slowly, some alone, others in pairs or small clusters. Their voices stay low, carrying only a few words at a time. Names, dates, fragments of prayers. Here and there, the gleam of a river stone catches the light, resting at the head of a grave. You've heard the custom before. In some places, mourners place smooth stones from the water's edge instead of flowers, believing the weight will hold the memory in place, keep it from being carried away. A grave digger in a wide-brimmed hat works at the far end, his spade biting into the earth with a steady rhythm. His boots are caked with dried mud, and the sleeves of his shirt are rolled past his elbows. He pauses only to wipe his forehead before turning the next shovelful, as if the work itself is the only thing keeping him upright. Near him, two boys kneel beside a mound, arranging stones in a careful pattern. One picks up a pebble, turns it over in his hand, then sets it at the center like the final piece of a puzzle. Historians are still debating how many of the graves on this hill hold remains that could be identified. Some were marked with names from the start, others bear only the date of the flood, the rest left to be guessed or remembered in silence. You notice a row of wooden markers, the paint already blurring in the damp air, and wonder how many of those names will still be legible a year from now. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of turned soil and the faint tang of river water that seems to cling to everything in the valley. It brushes through the grass, setting the taller blades swaying in a slow, uneven dance. A woman in a dark shawl kneels by one of the mounds, placing her hand flat on the earth and holding it there for a long moment before she rises. She doesn't look back as she walks away. From the top of the hill, you can see the bridge, the market quarter, and the winding thread of the river. The view is almost the same as it was before the flood, but your eyes can't help filling in what's missing. The house is gone, the fields flattened, the lives folded into the earth beneath your feet. The sun dips behind a thin layer of cloud, and the whole valley takes on the same muted tone as the stones at your side. The library smells different now. Not the warm dust and paper scent you remember, but something sharper, edged with mildew and wet wood. The main reading room is closed, its tables pushed together in the center and covered with tarps. Instead, all the work is happening in a narrow back chamber where the windows are propped open, letting in a thin draft that shuffles loose pages on the floor. This is the dry room, though it feels more like a slow-motion rescue ward. Along one wall, shelves hold books, standing open like small tents, their spines arched, their pages fanned in uneven curves. Some are speckled with silt, others blotched with water stains that spread outward like maps of forgotten continents. Volunteers move quietly between them, turning a page here, adjusting a clothespin there. They work with the care you'd give to an injured animal, steady, gentle, deliberate. At the center of the room, a table is piled with sawdust, pale and dry despite the damp air. A man in a waistcoat methodically buries a thin ledger in it, patting the shavings into the gaps between pages. You've heard of this method before, packing wet books in sawdust to pull out the moisture without warping the paper. The man explains without looking up that it only works if you catch the damage early. After a few days, the mold wins. His hands move as he speaks, the shavings rustling softly under his touch. Historians are still debating whether the salvage collection here was ever fully restored. Some say the most valuable manuscripts survived. Others claim much was lost to decay within months. Standing in this room, you can believe both. The air carries the stubborn hope of recovery, but also the faint, sour edge of things already too far gone. On a bench near the window, a young woman copies passages from a soaked notebook onto fresh paper, her pen moving quickly to keep ahead of the fading ink. Every so often, she pauses to warm her hands over a small brazier, then dips her pen again. Across from her, a boy carefully scrapes dried mud from the cover of a thick volume, revealing the faded gilt of its title. He smiles when the letters finally appear, as if the book itself had been holding its breath. Outside, the wind shifts, bringing the sound of the river faintly into the room. No one comments on it, but you can see the volunteers glance toward the sound, as if gauging how far away it feels now. Then they return to their work, turning, packing, copying, each motion a small refusal to let the flood have the last word. By the time you reach the bend where the river narrows, the air has that damp mineral scent that always hangs close to moving water. The banks look cleaner than before, as if the flood scrubbed them bare, but the shapes are subtly different. The slope on the far side is steeper now, the curve on your side gentler, as though the river has redrawn its own map in the night. You stand still and listen, trying to match the sound to the one you've known for years. It's quieter in some ways, softer at the edges, but there's a low note underneath that wasn't there before, a deeper, almost resonant hum when the current slides past the rocks near the old ferry post. A fisherman sitting on the bank tells you he hears it too. He says the flood carved a hollow under the waterline, a kind of hidden chamber where the flow hits just right, making the river speak in a new tone. You can't tell if he's joking until you notice the way he tilts his head, listening like a man learning a song. Historians are still debating whether survivors truly heard a changed voice in the river, or whether memory and loss made the familiar sound strange. Standing here, you can imagine either being true. The flood shifted more than earth and stone. It shifted how people hear the place, what they expect from it when they stop to listen. A few yards upstream, a child tosses a stick into the water and follows it along the bank, laughing when it spins in a small eddy before drifting away. The sound of the river blends with the light slap of the stick against the current, the two rhythms weaving together until you can't tell them apart. For a moment, it's easy to forget the past weeks, to just stand in the cool air and watch the water slide on. But then a bit of debris, an unrecognizable scrap of wood, floats past, spinning slowly in the same current that carried so much more not long ago. The hum under the surface seems to deepen for a heartbeat, then settles back into its steady voice. You take one last look before turning away, the sound following you like a half-remembered phrase. The days that followed became months, and the months began to smooth themselves into the sort of time you don't count. The streets dried, walls were rebuilt, and the market stalls filled again with the same voices, though never in quite the same way. People walked the bridge without looking down as often. But every so often, a hand would linger on the stone just a moment too long, feeling for something that wasn't there anymore. The graves on the hill grew grass. The stones gathered lichen. The library reopened, its shelves a mix of old survivors and new arrivals. In the dry room, the smell of sawdust eventually faded, leaving only the faintest ghost in the air for those who knew to notice. Children began playing by the water's edge again, daring each other to step into the shallows where the current curled. The hum in the river remained, a thread in the valley's new fabric, sometimes heard, sometimes forgotten, but always there. In the years ahead, the story of the flood would be told in many voices, in the careful pages of official ledgers, in the easy exaggerations of tavern talk, in the quiet, precise way elders would answer children's questions. Each version kept some things and let others slip away. The way water chooses its own path, no matter how many stones you set in its way. And in time, even the sharpest edges of memory wore smooth. The valley breathed at its own pace again, though some nights, when the air was just right, you could almost hear the deep hum from the bend carry all the way to the bridge. Another page closed, another memory gone up in smoke. Good night. Please rate the level of disaster on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments section, and subscribe to hear more stories about historical disasters before you go to sleep. Good night, peaceful, dreaming of forgotten ruins. Good night. See you in the dust of history.